3 children, one dying man, a lie that could save them all, or destroy everything. When Ethan Miller whispered those 2 words in that hospital corridor, he didn't know he was choosing between his last days of peace and the fight of his life. He didn't know those 3 identical faces would haunt him, heal him, and nearly break him. He only knew that sometimes the right choice feels like falling off a cliff. This is the story of how one desperate moment became 4 lifetimes. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in St. Catherine's Hospital hummed with the kind of persistence that made Ethan Miller want to scream. He'd been sitting in the same plastic chair for 43 minutes, watching the second hand on the wall clock drag itself around the face like it was moving through cement. The envelope in his hands had grown warm and slightly damp where his thumbs pressed against it. Dr. Reeves had handed it to him with that expression. The one doctors practiced in medical school, the one that said, "I'm sorry," without using words. "Your test results, Mr. Miller. I think you should open them somewhere comfortable, with someone you trust." But Ethan didn't have someone he trusted. Not anymore. Not since Rachel died 3 years ago, leaving him with a mortgage, a 7-year-old grief that sat in his chest like a stone, and an apartment that echoed when he walked through it. He turned the envelope over in his hands. The seal was pristine, clinical. Inside was a verdict he already knew, had known for weeks as the fatigue deepened and the pain in his abdomen became something he couldn't ignore anymore. Stage 3, probably. Maybe 4. The weight loss wasn't from finally eating better. The exhaustion wasn't from working too hard at the accounting firm. A family walked past, mother, father, 2 kids hanging on their arms like happy anchors. The father was laughing at something the youngest had said. The sound felt like glass breaking in Ethan's ears. He stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to be anywhere but in that chair. The envelope went into his jacket pocket. He'd open it later. Or tomorrow. Or never. The hallway stretched ahead of him, institutional green walls covered in paintings of flowers that had been chosen by someone who thought dying people needed cheerful colors. His footsteps echoed. A nurse pushed a cart past him. An elderly man in a wheelchair stared at nothing. Ethan walked without direction, following the maze of corridors on autopilot, left at pediatrics, right past radiology, through the double doors that led to the family waiting area. His mind was somewhere else entirely. Back in that kitchen 3 years ago, when Rachel had looked at him from the hospital bed they'd set up in what used to be their dining room, and said, "Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone, Ethan. Promise me you'll let someone in." He'd promised. He'd lied. The sound reached him before he understood what he was hearing. Crying. Quiet. Suppressed. The kind of crying that came from children who'd learned that being loud brought unwanted attention. Ethan stopped walking. 3 little girls sat huddled together on a bench in an alcove he'd almost passed. They were identical. The same honey-brown hair pulled into the same ponytails, the same spray of freckles across the same small noses, the same wide eyes currently brimming with tears. Triplets, maybe 7 or 8 years old. They wore matching blue dresses that looked like they'd been slept in, and their small hands were clasped together so tightly their knuckles were white. A woman in a gray pantsuit was speaking into a phone about 30 feet away, her back to the girls. Official-looking badge on her belt. Clipboard in her hand. Social worker, Ethan's mind supplied automatically. One of the girls, the one in the middle, looked up and met his eyes. The impact of that gaze hit him like a physical force. Terror. Pure, distilled terror. Ethan should have kept walking, should have recognized that whatever was happening here was none of his business, that he had enough to deal with, that getting involved in someone else's crisis when his own life was falling apart was the definition of insane. He took a step backward. The girl's eyes widened. Her sisters looked up then too. 3 identical faces turned toward him with such desperate hope that Ethan felt his chest constrict. The middle girl stood. Her sister's hands grabbed at her dress, trying to pull her back, but she came forward anyway, walking toward Ethan with steps that seemed to take all her courage. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that he could see the tear stains on her cheeks, the dirt smudged on the hem of her dress, the way her whole body was trembling. "Please," she whispered. The word came out broken. "Please, you have to help us." Ethan glanced at the social worker, still on the phone, gesturing with her free hand, papers rustling. I don't," he started. They're going to separate us. The girl's voice cracked. Mrs. Chen said there's no foster home that can take all three of us. They're going to send us to different places. We'll never see each other again. The other two girls had risen now, standing behind their sister like a unit, like they'd learned that together they were stronger. The one on the left, something in her posture suggested she was the eldest, though by minutes probably, spoke next. We just need you to pretend, just for a few minutes, just until she leaves. Pretend what? Ethan heard himself ask, even though he already knew, even though the insanity of this situation was growing by the second. That you're our dad, the third girl said. She had the same eyes as her sisters, but hers held something different, a hardness, a resignation, like she'd already prepared herself for rejection. Ethan's laugh came out sharp and humorless. You can't just... Look, I understand you're scared, but I can't lie to a social worker. She doesn't know what our dad looks like, the middle girl said quickly. Our parents died 4 months ago, car accident. Mrs. Chen just got our case yesterday. She's never seen pictures. She doesn't know. The words hit Ethan like a freight train. Our parents died. He knew that particular kind of loss, knew the way it carved you hollow and left you fumbling in the dark. He'd felt it when Rachel's hand had gone slack in his, when the monitors had flatlined, when the silence had become absolute. These three children knew it too, and they were about to lose each other on top of everything else. I'm sorry about your parents, Ethan said quietly. I really am, but this isn't... I can't. Please. The word came from all three of them simultaneously, a chorus of desperation that made something crack inside Ethan's chest. Please, please, please. The social worker's voice drifted over. Yes, I'm still here. You're saying the Hendersons can take one? Just one? What about... The middle girl grabbed Ethan's hand. Her fingers were ice cold and shaking. Just tell her you're our dad. Just tell her you're taking us home. That's all. We'll figure out the rest. We'll run away if we have to, but we can't let her separate us. We can't. Ethan looked down at the small hand gripping his, then at the three faces staring up at him with identical expressions of terrified hope. In his pocket, the envelope crackled. Inside was a diagnosis that would probably give him 6 months if he was lucky. 6 months of hospitals and treatments and the slow dismantling of everything he used to be. What did he have to lose? Everything, the rational part of his brain screamed. His job, his freedom, potential charges for interfering with child services. What did these girls have to lose? Each other, the only family they had left. Rachel's voice echoed in his memory. Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone. What are your names? He heard himself ask. The middle girl's grip on his hand tightened. I'm Nora. This is Ava. She gestured to the girl on the left. And June, the smallest one, the one with the hard eyes. Nora, Ava, June, Ethan repeated. You're asking me to commit fraud. You understand that, right? You're asking me to lie to an officer of the court. We're asking you to save us, Ava said simply. The social worker was wrapping up her call. Any second now, she'd turn around. Any second now, Ethan would have to make a choice that would either be the stupidest thing he'd ever done or what? The best? The right? He didn't know. He couldn't know. But he knew what Rachel would have done. Rachel, who'd spent her last coherent days making Ethan promise to donate to the children's hospital, to volunteer at the literacy program, to remember that the world needed kindness more than it needed caution. Okay, Ethan whispered, and felt his entire life tilt sideways. Okay. The transformation was immediate. All three girls moved to his sides, Nora keeping hold of his hand while Ava grabbed his other hand and June pressed against his leg. They fit there like puzzle pieces, like they'd practiced this formation. Maybe they had, in whatever desperate planning session had led them to approach a stranger in a hospital hallway. Mrs. Chen turned around. She was younger than Ethan had expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes and the exhausted expression of someone who'd been fighting bureaucracy all day and losing. Her gaze swept over the scene. Ethan standing with three girls clustered around him, and something in her face relaxed. Oh, thank goodness, she said, walking toward them with her clipboard clutched to her chest. I've been trying to reach you for hours, Mr. She glanced at her papers, frowning. I'm sorry. I don't seem to have the father's name in these notes. The initial report was incomplete. This was it. The moment. The lie that would either save these children or destroy him. Miller, Ethan said, and his voice came out steady even though his heart was trying to break through his ribs. Ethan Miller. Mrs. Chen's smile was genuine, warm. Mr. Miller, I'm Rebecca Chen, Child Protective Services. I'm so sorry about your wife. The loss of a parent is... She glanced at the girls. Well, it's unimaginable. I'm glad you were able to get here. I was worried when you didn't return my calls. She'd been calling someone. The girl's real father, maybe, before someone had updated her on the fact that both parents were dead. The system, Ethan was realizing, was full of cracks. These three small girls had found one and were trying desperately to slip through. My phone died, Ethan said. The lie tasted like copper on his tongue. I came as soon as I got the message from the hospital. Of course, of course. Mrs. Chen's clipboard rustled as she flipped pages. Now, I understand the girls were staying with their grandmother initially, but she's been hospitalized herself with a stroke. The hospital called us when they realized the children were here unsupervised. We've been trying to locate next of kin, but I'm here now, Ethan interrupted, tightening his grip on Nora's hand. She squeezed back, a silent plea. I can take them home. Mrs. Chen's expression shifted, became more cautious. Mr. Miller, I appreciate that you want to help, but there are procedures. We'll need to do a home assessment, background checks, verify employment, the standard protocol for... For what? June spoke up, her voice sharp despite its tremor. For making sure we're safe? We're safe with our dad. The word dad sounded strange coming from her, directed at a man she'd met 5 minutes ago. But Mrs. Chen didn't seem to notice. She was looking at Ethan with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to spot danger in a parent's expression, someone who'd seen too many children hurt by the people who were supposed to protect them. Whatever she saw in Ethan's face must have passed some internal test because her shoulders dropped slightly. I understand this is difficult, but we have to follow protocol, especially in cases where... Where what? Ethan asked. He could feel the girls pressing closer to him, could feel their fear like a living thing. Where their mother just died? Where they've already lost everything? You want to take them away from the only parent they have left? It was a low blow. Ethan knew it. But desperation made him cruel in a way he hadn't known he could be. Mrs. Chen's face softened with genuine sympathy. No one wants to separate families, Mr. Miller, but we have to ensure the children's safety. The report indicates you've been absent. The grandmother was the primary caregiver. We need to understand why, and we need to make sure you're in a position to care for 3 children full-time. I was working, Ethan said, assembling a story on the fly, pulling from fragments of truth and desperation. Out of state. Contract job. I came back as soon as I heard about the accident, but by then the girls were already with their grandmother, and she insisted she could handle it. I've been sending money, calling every day, but I should have... His voice caught, and it wasn't entirely acting. I should have been here. Ava looked up at him with something like awe. June's expression remained skeptical. Nora just kept squeezing his hand in a rhythm that felt like Morse code. Please, 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 please. Mrs. Chen studied her clipboard, then looked back at Ethan. A long moment stretched between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the hospital. Distant beeping, footsteps, the low murmur of conversation from other waiting families. Mr. Miller, she finally said, I'm going to need you to come to our office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We'll start the paperwork for temporary custody while we complete the full assessment. In the meantime, she paused, and Ethan could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the weighing of protocol against practicality. In the meantime, the girls can go home with you tonight. But I need your address, your phone number, and your word that you'll be at my office at 9 sharp. Ethan's mind raced. He rattled off his actual address, his actual phone number, watching as Mrs. Chen wrote them down with careful precision. Tomorrow at 9, she'd expect him. Tomorrow at 9, this whole fragile lie would collapse under the weight of background checks and records that didn't exist. But that was tomorrow. Right now, 3 terrified children were looking at him like he'd just pulled them back from the edge of a cliff. 9 a.m., Ethan confirmed. We'll be there. Mrs. Chen handed him a business card and several pages of paperwork. These are temporary guardianship forms. Read them over tonight. And Mr. Miller, I know this has been a difficult time, but those girls need stability. They need consistency. They need a parent who's present. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. Here he was, possibly dying, definitely lying, promising stability he couldn't guarantee. But he nodded anyway. I understand. Good. Mrs. Chen crouched down to the girl's level, her expression gentle. Ava, Nora, June, you're going home with your dad tonight, okay? Everything's going to be all right. 3 small voices chorused, okay. Mrs. Chen straightened, gave Ethan one last searching look, then gathered her things. 9 a.m., Mr. Miller. Don't make me come looking for you. I'll be there, Ethan promised, adding another lie to the growing pile. They watched her walk away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until she turned a corner and disappeared. The moment she was gone, all 3 girls released a collective breath that sounded like they'd been holding it for hours. Nora let go of Ethan's hand. Ava stepped back. June's expression shifted from desperate to wary in the space of a heartbeat. So, Ethan said into the sudden awkward silence, that happened. You actually did it, June said, and she sounded almost angry. You actually lied for us. I did, Ethan confirmed. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Which means we have approximately, he checked his watch, 16 hours before that lie completely falls apart, so I think we need to talk about what happens next. We run, June said immediately. We grab our stuff from the group home and we run, change our names, find somewhere they won't look. You're 8 years old, Ethan pointed out. You can't just run. Where would you even go? I'm 7, June corrected icily, and anywhere is better than being separated. Ava put a hand on her sister's arm. Maybe we should listen to him. He helped us. He didn't have to do that. He's a stranger, June shot back. We don't know anything about him. For all we know, he's... I'm not going to hurt you, Ethan interrupted quietly. I'm not going to take advantage of you. I'm someone who made a very stupid decision in a hospital hallway because 3 scared kids asked for help, and now we're all in this together. Nora was studying him with those 2 old eyes. You're sick, she said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Ethan's hand went unconsciously to his jacket pocket, to the envelope he still hadn't opened. What makes you say that? You're in a hospital. You weren't visiting anyone. You were waiting alone. Nora's voice was matter-of-fact. And you looked sad. Really sad. The kind of sad our mom had before... She stopped, swallowed hard. Before she died. The words hung unspoken between them. Yeah, Ethan admitted. I'm sick. I don't know how sick yet. I'm finding out. He pulled out the envelope, looked at it, then made a decision and tore it open. The single page inside was dense with medical terminology, but his eyes found the relevant section immediately. Stage 4 adenocarcinoma. Metastatic. Prognosis. 6 to 8 months with aggressive treatment. Palliative care recommended. 6 to 8 months. Not even a year. He was dying, and he'd just tied himself to 3 children who needed someone who could actually take care of them. That bad? Ava asked softly. Pretty bad, Ethan said. He refolded the paper, slipped it back into the envelope. Which is another reason why this whole plan is insane. I'm not in a position to... Nobody is, Nora interrupted. Nobody's ever in a position to help. But you did it anyway. The simple truth of that statement hit Ethan harder than the diagnosis had. She was right. Life didn't wait for you to be ready. It didn't care if you were dying or grieving or completely unprepared. It just kept happening, kept demanding choices, kept forcing you to decide what kind of person you were going to be. Ethan had spent 3 years choosing to be alone, choosing safety over risk, choosing the quiet emptiness of his apartment over the messy uncertainty of human connection. These 3 girls had just blown that choice to pieces. Okay, he said, and felt the weight of the decision settle onto his shoulders. Okay, here's what's going to happen. We go to my apartment, we figure out sleeping arrangements. We order pizza or something, and we come up with an actual plan, because showing up at Mrs. Chen's office tomorrow with nothing is going to get us all in serious trouble." "What kind of plan?" June asked suspiciously. "I have no idea," Ethan admitted. "But I know a lawyer, someone I used to work with. Maybe she can help navigate this without everyone ending up in jail." It was a thin hope, but it was something. More than they'd had 5 minutes ago. Nora reached out and took his hand again. The gesture was tentative this time, questioning rather than desperate. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For not walking away?" Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for asking. He paused, surprised by the truth of what he was about to say. "I think I needed someone to ask." They walked through the hospital together, 4 strangers pretending to be a family, carrying a lie that could save them or shatter them. The late afternoon sun was bleeding through the windows, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Outside in the parking lot, Ethan's car sat exactly where he'd left it 4 hours ago, a lifetime ago, before everything changed. He unlocked the doors. The girls climbed into the back seat without being told, arranging themselves in order. Ava, Nora, June, like they'd done this countless times before, like they knew exactly where they belonged. Ethan slid behind the wheel and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, 3 identical faces stared back at him, reflecting his own uncertainty, his own fear, his own desperate hope that this insane gamble might somehow work. "Everybody buckled?" he asked. 3 clicks answered him. "Okay then." Ethan put the car in reverse. "Let's go home." The word felt strange in his mouth. Home. He hadn't called his apartment that in 3 years. It was just the place where he slept, where he ate occasionally, where he existed in the spaces between work and sleep and slow deterioration. But as he drove through the city streets with 3 borrowed children in his back seat, something shifted. The apartment was still the same building, same address, same walls. But maybe home wasn't about the place. Maybe it was about the people who filled it, who needed it, who turned empty rooms into something that mattered. The drive took 20 minutes. The girls were silent, watching the city slide past the windows with identical expressions of cautious hope. Ethan's mind was already racing ahead, cataloging problems. They'd need beds, clothes, food that wasn't frozen dinners, school enrollment, medical records. A convincing story for Mrs. Chen. A miracle. He pulled into the parking garage beneath his building and killed the engine. For a moment, none of them moved. This was it, the point of no return. Once they went upstairs, once they walked into his apartment, the lie became real in a new way. Tangible. Unavoidable. "Mr. Miller?" Nora's voice was small in the sudden quiet. "Ethan," he corrected. "If we're doing this, you should probably call me Ethan." "Ethan." She tried the name out, testing it. "What happens if Mrs. Chen finds out the truth?" It was the question they were all thinking. Ethan turned in his seat to face them, to look at these 3 small, fierce, terrified girls who'd put their lives in his hands. "Then we tell her a different truth," he said slowly, the words forming as he spoke them. "We tell her that yes, I'm not your biological father, but I'm someone who wants to help. Someone who thinks 3 sisters shouldn't be torn apart because the system is broken, and we fight like hell to keep you together." "And if that doesn't work?" June challenged. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Then we cross that bridge when we come to it, but we cross it together." Something in June's expression cracked, just slightly. The hardness softened into something that looked almost like trust. They climbed out of the car and rode the elevator to the 7th floor in silence. Ethan's apartment was at the end of the hall, 7F, overlooking the parking lot and a small park beyond. He'd chosen it for the light, back when he and Rachel had been looking for a place to start fresh after her remission. Back when they'd thought they had time. The door swung open to reveal exactly what Ethan had left that morning. A sparse living room with furniture that had seen better days, a kitchen that was mostly clean because he barely used it, and a hallway that led to 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom. Not nearly enough space for 4 people. But it would have to be enough. The girls filed in, moving carefully like they were entering a museum. They stood in the center of the living room, uncertain, waiting for permission to exist in this space. "Make yourselves comfortable," Ethan said, closing the door behind them. "I need to make a phone call." He stepped into the kitchen, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Sarah Chen, attorney at law. No relation to Rebecca Chen, thank God. He'd worked with Sarah on a corporate case 2 years ago, had been impressed by her sharp mind and sharper instincts. If anyone could help navigate this legal nightmare, it was her. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Ethan Miller, it's been a while. How are you? I need your help, Ethan said without preamble. And before you ask, yes, it's serious, and no, it can't wait. Sarah's tone shifted immediately, professional concern replacing casual greeting. What happened? I just lied to a social worker and told her I'm the father of 3 children I met an hour ago in a hospital hallway. Tomorrow morning at 9, I'm supposed to show up at Child Protective Services for a custody evaluation. I have no legal right to these children, no biological connection, and approximately 16 hours to figure out how to not go to jail while also keeping 3 sisters from being separated forever. Silence on the other end of the line, then, Jesus Christ, Ethan, can you help? More silence. Ethan could practically hear Sarah's legal mind working through the implications, the laws, the potential consequences. I'm going to need you to start from the beginning, she finally said. And I mean the very beginning. Don't leave anything out. So Ethan told her about the hospital, about his diagnosis, about 3 terrified girls and a social worker's phone call, and a lie that had spiraled into a commitment he couldn't back out of now, even if he wanted to. When he finished, Sarah let out a long, slow breath. Okay. This is complicated, Ethan. What you did, impersonating their legal guardian, that's fraud. It's a criminal offense. If this goes wrong, you could face charges. I know. But, Sarah continued, there might be a way through this, a narrow way. We'd have to move fast and we'd have to be completely transparent from here on out. No more lies, no more deception. We tell Mrs. Chen the truth and we petition for emergency foster placement with intent to adopt. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Adopt? Sarah, I'm dying. I have 6 months, maybe 8. They're not going to let a dying man adopt 3 children. They might let a dying man provide temporary stability while we find a permanent solution, Sarah countered. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The system is going to fight you every step of the way. You're single, you're ill, you have no prior relationship with these children, but you know what the system is also going to do? It's going to split those girls up and send them to separate foster homes because there aren't enough placements for sibling groups. And that's a trauma those kids might never recover from. So what are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the system is so broken that a dying man's apartment is still the better option. I'm saying we present this to Mrs. Chen as what it is, an imperfect solution to an impossible situation. And we make the case that keeping those girls together is worth the risk of bending some rules. Hope flickered in Ethan's chest, small and fragile. You really think that could work? I think it's a long shot. I think we'll need documentation, character references, a home study, medical clearances, and probably a miracle. But Ethan? I've seen worse cases succeed. I've seen families built on a hell of a lot less than what you're offering those girls. Ethan looked through the kitchen doorway to where Ava, Nora, and June sat pressed together on his couch, 3 pairs of identical eyes watching him with a hope so fierce it hurt to witness. What do I need to do? He asked. Tonight, feed them. Give them a safe place to sleep. Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to walk into that office together, and we're going to tell Mrs. Chen exactly what happened. Then we're going to fight. Together, Ethan repeated. Together, Sarah confirmed. I'll meet you there at 8:30. We'll prep beforehand. And Ethan, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She hung up. Ethan stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to absorb everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. He'd gone to the hospital expecting a death sentence. He'd gotten that, along with 3 children and a lawyer, and a plan that was equal parts insane and necessary. Rachel would have laughed at the absurdity of it all. Then she would have rolled up her sleeves and started making dinner. Ethan pocketed his phone and walked back into the living room. Okay, he announced. Here's the situation. Tomorrow morning, we're going to tell Mrs. Chen the truth. All of it. But we're also going to fight to keep you 3 together. My lawyer thinks there's a chance, a small chance, that we can make this work. What kind of chance? June asked. The honest kind, Ethan said. The kind where we don't know if we'll win, but we know we're going to try. The girls exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Nora spoke for all three. Okay, we'll try. Good. Ethan clapped his hands together, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Now, practical matters. You three need to sleep. I have one bedroom with one bed. I'll take the couch. You can... We'll share, Ava interrupted. We're used to it. Of course they were. Ethan led them down the hallway to his bedroom, to the queen-size bed that hadn't been slept in by anyone but him since Rachel died. The sheets were clean, at least. He'd changed them last week in a fit of optimism that had quickly faded. Bathroom's through there, he pointed. I'll find some clothes you can sleep in. We'll go shopping tomorrow for... He stopped, realizing he had no idea what 3 7-year-old girls needed. Everything, probably. For everything. They nodded in unison, still moving like a single unit. Ethan retreated to give them privacy, rummaging through his own dresser for t-shirts that might work as makeshift nightgowns. When he returned, they were sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clasped together, whispering to each other in voices too low for him to hear. Here, he handed them the shirts. It's not much, but... Thank you, Nora said, and the other two echoed her. Thank you, thank you. Ethan left them to change, closing the door behind him. In the living room, he collapsed onto the couch and let his head fall back against the cushions. His body ached. The diagnosis was a weight in his chest, and in his bedroom, 3 children he barely knew were putting on his shirts and climbing into his bed, trusting him with their safety, their futures, their fragile hope. What had he done? What had he started? The question spiraled, but underneath them was something else. Something he hadn't felt in 3 years of grieving, of existing rather than living, of waiting for his own ending to arrive. Purpose. Rachel's voice whispered through his memory one more time. Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone. I won't, Ethan said to the empty room, to her ghost, to whatever came next. I promise. In the bedroom, a small voice called out. Ethan, can you leave the hall light on? June doesn't like the dark. I'm not afraid of the dark, June's voice protested. It's okay if you are, came Ava's gentle response. Ethan stood and flicked on the hallway light, watching the warm glow spill across the hardwood floor. Good night, he called. I'm right out here if you need anything. 3 voices answered in sleepy unison. Good night. Ethan returned to the couch, grabbed the throw blanket from the armrest, and curled up in the corner. His phone sat on the coffee table next to the envelope with his test results. Tomorrow would bring Mrs. Chen, Sarah, the truth, and whatever consequences came with it. But tonight he wasn't alone. Tonight, in his too small apartment with its hand-me-down furniture and its empty spaces, there were 3 children breathing softly in the bedroom, 3 hearts beating in rhythm, 3 lives that had collided with his in a hospital hallway and changed everything. Ethan closed his eyes and, for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt something that might have been peace. Ethan woke to the sound of whispering. For a moment, disoriented in the gray light of dawn, he couldn't place where he was or why his back ached like he'd been sleeping on concrete. Then memory crashed over him. The hospital, the lie, 3 girls in his bedroom. And he sat up so quickly, the throw blanket slid to the floor. The whispering stopped. We didn't mean to wake you up, Nora's voice came from the kitchen doorway. All 3 girls stood there in his oversized t-shirts, their hair tangled from sleep, their expressions uncertain. We were trying to be quiet. It's fine, Ethan said, his voice rough. He checked his phone. 6:15. His meeting with Sarah was in 2 hours and 15 minutes. His reckoning with Mrs. Chen in less than 3. What are you doing up so early? We're always up early, Ava said. Grandmother liked breakfast at 6:30. She said it was important to have routines. Routines. Structure. The things children needed and Ethan hadn't provided for anyone in years. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to gather his thoughts. Are you hungry? 3 heads nodded in unison. Right. Okay, let me see what I have. Ethan stood, his joints protesting, and moved past them into the kitchen. The refrigerator revealed its usual sparse contents, a carton of eggs that might still be good, half a loaf of bread, some butter, and a container of milk he should probably smell before using. How do you feel about scrambled eggs? We can make them, June offered, surprising him. Grandmother taught us. She said we needed to know how to take care of ourselves. The statement landed heavy in the quiet kitchen. These children, who'd already lost so much, had been preparing for more loss, learning self-sufficiency because the adults in their lives kept disappearing. Tell you what, Ethan said carefully, how about we make them together? I could use the company. It was clumsy, this attempt at connection, but the girls seemed to accept it. They moved into the kitchen with practiced efficiency, June cracking eggs while Ava found a bowl and Nora located a whisk in a drawer she shouldn't have known about. They worked in synchronized silence, 3 parts of a whole, while Ethan heated the pan and tried not to think about how temporary this all was. Mr. Miller, Nora started. Ethan, he reminded her. Ethan, she corrected, whisking the eggs with more force than necessary. What happens if she says no today? Mrs. Chen? It was the question they'd all been avoiding. Ethan turned down the heat on the stove, buying himself a moment to find the right words. Then we appeal. We fight harder. My lawyer, Sarah, she's good at this. She won't give up easily. But what if fighting isn't enough? Ava asked quietly. What if the rules say we have to be separated no matter what? Ethan looked at these 3 small faces, so alike and yet so different in the ways they carried their fear. Ava, the gentle one, already preparing herself for disappointment. Nora, the hopeful one, still clinging to the possibility of rescue. June, the pragmatic one, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then the rules are wrong, he said simply, and we'll keep fighting until someone listens. June's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. You really believe that? That fighting matters? I have to, Ethan said, and realized it was true. For 3 years he'd stopped fighting, stopped trying, stopped believing that resistance against the inevitable was anything but futile. But these girls needed him to believe differently. Maybe he needed to believe differently too. Besides, I've got nothing to lose. The words hung in the air, stark and honest. June studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting this truth. They ate breakfast at Ethan's small dining table, the one Rachel had found at an estate sale and refinished herself. The eggs were decent, the conversation was sparse, but there was something almost comfortable in the quiet, in the small domestic ritual of sharing a meal. At 7:30, Ethan sent the girls to get dressed in yesterday's rumpled dresses while he showered and shaved and tried to look like someone responsible enough to care for children. The man in the mirror looked back at him with hollow eyes and cheekbones a bit too sharp from the weight loss he'd been ignoring. He looked like what he was, sick, tired, in over his head. He put on his best suit anyway, the navy one he wore to client meetings. Armor for the battle ahead. By 8 o'clock, they were in the car, driving through morning traffic toward the downtown office where Sarah had said she'd meet them. The girls were silent in the back seat, hands clasped together in that way they had, drawing strength from each other. Ethan's own hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing through every possible scenario, every argument Sarah might make, every reason Mrs. Chen might say no. Sarah was waiting outside the coffee shop next to the Child Protective Services building, 2 cups in hand and a leather briefcase slung over her shoulder. She was younger than Ethan remembered, early 30s maybe, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She handed him one of the coffees as he approached. You look terrible, she said without preamble. Good morning to you too. I'm serious, Ethan. When's the last time you slept? Actually slept? Define actually. Sarah's expression tightened with concern, but she didn't push. Instead, she crouched down to the girl's level, her severe expression softening. You must be Ava, Nora, and June. I'm Sarah Chen. I'm going to help Mr. Miller, Ethan, with the legal side of things. Can you tell me which of you is which? The girls exchanged glances. Finally, Ava stepped forward. I'm Ava. That's Nora. She pointed to her middle sister. And that's June. Nice to meet you all. Sarah straightened, pulling a notepad from her briefcase. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to go in there, and Ethan is going to tell Mrs. Chen the truth, all of it, no more lies. Then I'm going to make the case for emergency foster placement. Mrs. Chen is going to have concerns, a lot of them, and we're going to address each one calmly and professionally. And if she says no? June asked, echoing her earlier question. Then we move to Plan B, Sarah said firmly. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we try Plan A. They walked into the building together, through security, and up to the third floor where Rebecca Chen's office was located. The waiting area was filled with people in various states of distress. A young mother bouncing a crying baby, an elderly man filling out forms with shaking hands, a teenager slumped in a chair with headphones on. The fluorescent lights made everyone look slightly ill. Mrs. Chen appeared in a doorway at exactly 9 o'clock. Her expression when she saw Ethan and the girls was pleasant, professional. But when her gaze landed on Sarah, something shifted. Recognition, maybe. Wariness. "Mr. Miller," she said. "Girls, please come in." She paused. "And you are?" "Sarah Chen," Sarah extended her hand. "Mr. Miller's attorney, no relation to you before you ask. I'm here to help facilitate this conversation." Rebecca Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she shook Sarah's hand and gestured them all into her office. It was small, cluttered with case files and children's drawings pinned to a bulletin board. 4 chairs sat across from her desk. They all sat, the girls pressed close together, Sarah next to Ethan, creating a unified front. Mrs. Chen settled behind her desk, pulling out a file. "Mr. Miller, I have to say, I'm a bit surprised you brought legal counsel to what was supposed to be a routine intake meeting." "Mrs. Chen," Ethan started, then stopped. His rehearsed speech evaporated. All the careful words Sarah had coached him on in the coffee shop fled his mind, leaving only raw truth. "I lied to you yesterday." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Chen's pen stopped moving. Sarah's hand tightened on her briefcase. The girls seemed to stop breathing. "I'm not their father," Ethan continued, the words tumbling out now. "I'd never met them before yesterday. I was at the hospital for my own appointment, and they approached me because they were scared, terrified, actually. They knew you were going to separate them, and they begged me to pretend, and He swallowed hard. "I said yes. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was fraud, but I said yes anyway." Mrs. Chen's expression had gone very still, very professional, the kind of still that came before an explosion. "Mr. Miller, do you understand the severity of what you're telling me? You impersonated a legal guardian. You removed children from state custody under false pretenses. Those are criminal offenses." "I know," Ethan said, "and I'm not asking you to ignore that. I'm asking you to understand why." "Why doesn't matter in cases like this," Mrs. Chen said, but there was something in her voice, uncertainty, maybe, or conflict. "Respectfully, Mrs. Chen, I disagree," Sarah interjected smoothly. "Why always matters. And the why here is that 3 children were facing the trauma of separation on top of losing both parents and their grandmother. Mr. Miller made a poor choice in the method, but his motivation was sound, to prevent further harm to these girls. His motivation doesn't give him the right to lie to a social worker and kidnap children from— "We didn't kidnap anyone," June interrupted, her voice sharp. "We asked him to help. He's the only person who listened." Mrs. Chen's attention swiveled to June. "Sweetheart, I understand you're scared." "Don't call me sweetheart," June said flatly. "And don't tell me you understand. You were going to split us up. We heard you on the phone. One here, one there, one somewhere else. Like we're not even a family anymore." "June?" Mrs. Chen's voice softened with what sounded like genuine regret. "There are procedures, rules. I can't just place 3 children with a stranger because—" "Then change the rules," Nora said, and her voice was steady despite the tears starting to track down her cheeks. "Or bend them, or break them. We don't care. We just want to stay together." Mrs. Chen looked at the 3 girls, then at Ethan, then at Sarah. The conflict on her face was naked, painful to witness. "You're asking me to ignore policy, ignore protocol, and place 3 vulnerable children with a man who just admitted to committing fraud. Do you understand how that sounds?" "I understand it sounds irregular," Sarah said, "which is why I'm proposing we do this by the book from here forward. Emergency foster placement, with full background checks, home study, medical clearance, and regular visits from your office, completely transparent, completely monitored, but together." That's the key, Mrs. Chen. They stay together. Mr. Miller has no foster certification, no relationship with these children, no— Mrs. Chen paused, shuffling papers. According to preliminary notes, no spouse, no family support system. He works full-time at an accounting firm. How exactly is he supposed to care for 3 7-year-old girls? This was it. The moment where Ethan's diagnosis became relevant, became an obstacle that might be insurmountable. He felt Sarah tense beside him, preparing to spin it somehow, to make stage 4 cancer sound like a minor inconvenience. But Ethan was done lying. "I'm dying," he said quietly. "Stage 4 cancer. 6 to 8 months, maybe less. I found out yesterday, right before I met the girls. So you're right. I'm not the ideal candidate. I'm sick, I'm alone, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But I'm here. I'm willing. And for however long I have left, I can give these girls what they need most: each other." The office was so quiet, Ethan could hear the clock on the wall ticking, could hear Mrs. Chen's breath catch, could hear one of the girls, Ava, he thought, let out a small, heartbroken sound. Mrs. Chen's professional mask cracked. She looked at Ethan with something that might have been compassion or might have been pity. "Mr. Miller, I'm very sorry. But you must understand this makes the situation even more complicated. We can't place children with someone who won't be able to care for them in a few months. We'd just be delaying the inevitable separation. Or," Sarah said, and her voice had taken on an edge, "you'd be giving them time. Time to grieve their parents properly. Time to adjust to their new reality. Time to stay together during the hardest period of their lives. And time for us to find a permanent solution that keeps them as a sibling group." "What permanent solution?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Sibling groups of 3 are incredibly difficult to place. The statistics are why we're here," Sarah interrupted. "Because we both know that if you separate them today, the chances of reunifying them later are close to 0. This way we maintain family integrity while we search for the right placement. Maybe a relative comes forward. Maybe we find a foster family willing to take all 3. Or maybe," she glanced at Ethan, "we petition for Mr. Miller to arrange long-term guardianship with a trusted individual before he becomes unable to care for them." It was a plan assembled from hope and desperation, full of maybes and uncertainties. But it was more than they'd had yesterday. Mrs. Chen leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her face. The silence stretched. Ethan could feel the girls trembling beside him, could feel his own heart hammering against his ribs. "This is highly irregular," Mrs. Chen finally said. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "The board would have my head if they found out I approved this." "Probably," Sarah said, "but you'd have given 3 children a fighting chance." Mrs. Chen closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked older, tireder. "I became a social worker to help children, not to enforce rules that hurt them." She pulled a form from her desk drawer, began filling it out with sharp, decisive strokes. "Emergency foster placement, 60 days. During that time, Mr. Miller, you will undergo a full background check, home study, medical evaluation, and weekly check-ins with my office. The girls will be enrolled in school, receive counseling, and have regular medical checkups. 1 infraction, 1 concern, 1 red flag, and this arrangement ends immediately. Do you understand?" Ethan's voice came out hoarse. "I understand." "And you—" Mrs. Chen looked at Sarah. "Will be filing the appropriate paperwork for legal guardianship and working with my office to identify permanent placement options for when Mr. Miller is no longer able to care for them." "Already drafted," Sarah said, pulling documents from her briefcase. "I just need his signature." Mrs. Chen nodded, still writing. "The girls will need to be registered at Madison Elementary. It's closest to Mr. Miller's address. I'll need proof of enrollment within 2 weeks. They'll also need to begin seeing Dr. Patricia Morrison, a child psychologist who specializes in grief counseling. I'll send you her contact information." She kept talking, listing requirements and expectations and warnings, while Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. She was saying yes. Against all logic, against policy, against every reasonable objection, she was saying yes. "Why?" he asked, interrupting her mid-sentence. "Why are you helping us?" Mrs. Chen stopped writing. She looked at the three girls who were staring at her with identical expressions of desperate hope, then back at Ethan. Because 3 months ago, I separated a sibling group of two, brothers, ages 5 and 7. The foster homes promised we'd maintain contact, arrange visits. But placements fell through, families moved, and now those boys haven't seen each other in 90 days. The younger one has stopped talking. The older one acts out constantly, gets moved from home to home, and asks about his brother every single day. Her voice cracked slightly and she cleared her throat. I follow the rules, Mr. Miller. I do everything by the book. And sometimes that means I break children's hearts because the system demands it. So forgive me if, just this once, I bend the rules instead. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will blow up in both our faces. But at least I'll know I tried something different. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Mrs. Chen finished the form, signed it, and slid it across the desk. Congratulations, Mr. Miller. You're officially a foster parent. Don't make me regret this. I won't, Ethan promised, and meant it with everything in him. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and desperate attempts to transform his bachelor apartment into something resembling a home for 3 children. Sarah guided him through the legal maze with ruthless efficiency, while Mrs. Chen's office conducted their investigation with equally ruthless thoroughness. Background check, clean. No criminal record, no concerning history. Home study, marginal. The apartment was too small, the furniture too sparse, but it was clean and safe and showed evidence of genuine effort to accommodate the girls. Medical evaluation, complicated. Ethan's oncologist had written a careful letter stating that while his prognosis was poor, he was currently stable and capable of caring for children with appropriate support. That support came from unexpected places. Ethan's boss at the accounting firm, initially furious about Ethan's sudden request for reduced hours, softened when he learned the full story and agreed to let Ethan work from home 3 days a week. A neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, an elderly widow who'd been trying to befriend Ethan for years, appeared at his door with casseroles and offered to babysit whenever needed. Even the oncology nurses, when they heard he'd taken in foster children, started scheduling his treatments for times that wouldn't interfere with school pickup. The girls adjusted to their new life with a resilience that broke Ethan's heart. Ava, gentle and intuitive, appointed herself as the household peacemaker, mediating disputes between her sisters and reminding everyone to be patient with each other. Nora, the optimist, threw herself into decorating their shared bedroom with drawings and craft projects, turning the bland walls into an explosion of color. June, the skeptic, maintained her wariness for exactly 5 days before Ethan caught her crying in the bathroom after a nightmare and held her until she fell back asleep in his arms. After that, June's walls came down in increments. She started asking Ethan questions about his work, his life, his wife. She told him about her parents, about the accident, about how Ava had screamed and Nora had gone silent, and June herself had felt nothing at all for days afterward because the grief was too big to feel all at once. School enrollment brought its own challenges. Madison Elementary required birth certificates, immunization records, proof of guardianship. Sarah procured the necessary documents through official channels, while Ethan met with teachers and counselors to explain the girls' situation. The principal, a woman named Dr. Hartwell with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, pulled Ethan aside after the enrollment meeting. Mr. Miller, I want you to know that our staff is trained in trauma-informed care. We understand these girls have been through something devastating, and we'll do everything we can to support them. But I need you to be realistic about what the next few months might look like. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. They might be fine one day and falling apart the next. They might act out, shut down, or regress. And you, she paused, choosing her words carefully, you need to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. Ethan nodded, trying to ignore the irony. His cup wasn't just empty. It was cracked and leaking and would be completely shattered in a matter of months. But he didn't say that. Instead, he thanked Dr. Hartwell and promised to stay in close communication with the school. The girls' first day at Madison Elementary was harder than Ethan had anticipated. All 3 clung to him at the entrance, their earlier excitement evaporating in the face of a building full of strangers. Other children stared at them, the identical triplets, the new kids, the ones with the tragic story that had somehow already spread through the parent gossip network. You don't have to do this, Ethan said quietly, crouching to their level. We can wait another week if you need more time. No, Ava said, though her voice shook. We're already behind. We need to start. Nora gripped his hand tighter. You'll be here to pick us up? You promise? I promise, Ethan said. 3 o'clock. Right here at these doors. June said nothing, but her jaw was set in that determined way she had when she was scared but refusing to show it. A teacher appeared, Miss Rodriguez, 2nd grade, who'd been briefed on their situation. Good morning, girls. I've been so excited to meet you. We have 3 desks all set up right next to each other, and I thought maybe you could help me name the class Goldfish. They're new too. It was a gentle, practiced approach, and it worked. Nora's grip loosened slightly. Ava managed a small smile. June allowed herself to be guided toward the classroom, though she looked back at Ethan 3 times before disappearing through the door. Ethan stood in that hallway for a full 5 minutes after they were gone, fighting the urge to pull them back out, to keep them close, to protect them from a world that had already hurt them so much. But protection wasn't what they needed. They needed normalcy, routine, the chance to be children again, even if that childhood was shadowed by loss. He forced himself to leave, to drive to his office, to attempt to focus on spreadsheets and tax codes while his mind remained locked on 3 small girls facing a cafeteria full of strangers. His coworkers were kind but awkward, unsure how to approach the dying man who'd suddenly acquired foster children. They asked polite questions. How are the girls adjusting? Do you need anything? How are you feeling? But their eyes betrayed their confusion. Ethan understood. He confused himself most days, caught between the reality of his diagnosis and the surreal domesticity of packing school lunches and signing permission slips. At 2:45, he left work early and drove back to Madison Elementary. He was 15 minutes early, but he couldn't help it. The need to see them, to confirm they were okay, was overwhelming. Other parents were gathering, chatting in clusters, comparing notes on homework and upcoming field trips. Ethan stood apart, aware of the curious glances, the whispered conversations that cut off when he moved closer. He was an outsider here, in this world of minivans and soccer practices and normal family structures. The bell rang at 3 o'clock sharp. Doors burst open and children poured out like a flood. Ethan scanned the crowd, searching for 3 identical faces, his heart rate climbing when he didn't spot them immediately. Then there they were. Ava first, her backpack bouncing, a smile on her face that looked genuine. Nora close behind, chattering to a dark-haired girl about something that involved wild hand gestures. And June at the rear, walking alone but with her head high, defiant rather than defeated. They saw him simultaneously. Ava's face lit up. Nora waved enthusiastically. Even June's expression softened into something that almost resembled relief. You came! Nora launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over with the force of her hug. I promised, didn't I? Ethan caught her, then Ava, who joined the embrace. June stood slightly apart, but when Ethan extended his arm, she stepped into it, allowing herself to be pulled into the group hug. How was it? Ethan asked when they finally separated. The flood of responses was immediate and overlapping. Ms. Rodriguez was nice. The goldfish were named Bubbles and Trouble. Lunch was weird, but okay. There was a girl named Maya who invited them to sit at her table. The math was easy, but the reading was hard. Someone asked about their parents, and Nora had cried, but Ava had explained, and then it was okay. They talked over each other all the way to the car. A chaotic symphony of 7-year-old observations and concerns and small triumphs. Ethan listened, filed away names and details, made mental notes about which subjects needed extra help and which social dynamics required monitoring. This, he realized, was parenting. Not the big dramatic moments, but the accumulation of small ones, the after-school debriefs, the homework struggles, the negotiations over bedtime. He'd been terrified of failing at it, of his inexperience showing. But maybe everyone felt that way. Maybe every parent was just improvising, hoping their best was good enough. That evening, while the girls did homework at the dining table and Ethan attempted to cook something more substantial than scrambled eggs, his phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. Tell me you have good news, Ethan answered, stirring pasta that was definitely overcooking. Define good, Sarah said. Mrs. Chen's office completed their investigation. Everything came back clean. You're officially approved for the full 60-day placement. Ethan sagged against the counter in relief. That's great. That's... Wait, you said define good. What's the bad news? The bad news is 60 days isn't very long, Ethan. We need to start working on a permanent solution now. Have you thought about who you might want to designate as long-term guardian? Someone you trust. Someone who'd be willing to take all three girls when you... She paused delicately. When you can't anymore. The question Ethan had been avoiding. He turned off the stove, abandoning the pasta. I don't know anyone like that, Sarah. My parents are dead. Rachel's parents are in poor health themselves. I don't have siblings. My friends are all single workaholics like I was. There's no one. Then we need to find someone, Sarah said firmly, or we petition for the state to keep them together in their next placement. But Ethan, you need to understand, without someone specific to transition them to, the chances of them staying together after you're gone drop significantly. After you're gone. Such a clinical phrase for dying, for abandoning three children who'd already been abandoned too many times. How long do I have? Ethan asked. Ethan, to figure this out? Realistically, we should have a plan in place within the next 30 days. I know that's not a lot of time, but... It's fine, Ethan interrupted. I'll figure something out. He hung up and stood in his kitchen, surrounded by the sounds of domestic life. The girls arguing over a math problem, the television playing quietly in the background, the pasta water still boiling on the stove. This life he'd accidentally built. This fragile ecosystem of four broken people trying to be whole together. It had an expiration date, and that date was approaching faster than he wanted to acknowledge. Ethan? Ava's voice pulled him from his spiral. The pasta's boiling over. He turned to find all three girls watching him with concern. They'd gotten good at reading his moods, at sensing when the weight of everything became too much. It was a skill children shouldn't have to develop, but trauma had made them experts in emotional surveillance. Right, Ethan said, forcing brightness into his voice. Crisis averted. Who's ready for slightly mushy spaghetti? They ate dinner together, crowded around the too small table, and Ethan pushed thoughts of 30-day deadlines and permanent placements to the back of his mind. Tonight, they were together. Tonight, they were okay. That would have to be enough. After dinner, while June helped load the dishwasher and Nora practiced spelling words, Ava approached Ethan with a piece of paper clutched in her small hands. We made something at school today. For our families. I made mine for you. The drawing was simple. Stick figures holding hands in front of a rectangular house. 4 figures. 3 small, 1 tall. Above them, written in careful second-grade printing. My family. Ethan's throat closed. Ava, this is beautiful. Thank you. Ms. Rodriguez said family doesn't always mean the same thing to everyone, Ava said quietly. She said family is people who take care of each other. People who show up. Is that true? Yes, Ethan managed. That's exactly true. Ava smiled, satisfied, and skipped back to her homework. Ethan taped the drawing to the refrigerator, next to a shopping list and a reminder about an upcoming doctor's appointment. 4 stick figures holding hands, a family assembled from desperation and lies and impossible choices. He had 30 days to make sure they had someone to hold on to when he was gone. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it crystallized into determination. These girls had already lost too much. He would not let them lose each other. Whatever it took, whoever he had to convince, whatever miracle he had to manufacture, he would find them a home that kept them together. He just had to figure out how. The answer came from the last place Ethan expected, over burnt toast on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks into their fragile arrangement. Mrs. Kowalski had knocked on the door at 7:15, earlier than usual, carrying a covered dish that smelled like heaven, and wearing an expression that suggested she had something to say. The girls were still getting dressed for school, arguing about whose turn it was to use the bathroom first, their voices carrying through the thin walls. I made pierogi, Mrs. Kowalski announced, pushing past Ethan into the kitchen. My grandmother's recipe. The girls, they are too skinny. You are too skinny. Everyone needs to eat. Ethan had learned not to argue with Mrs. Kowalski about food. She'd been appearing at his door with increasing frequency since the girls arrived, always with some dish or another, always with that sharp-eyed assessment that made him feel simultaneously cared for and scrutinized. "Thank you," he said, taking the dish. "Then you really don't have to keep doing this." "I know I don't have to," Mrs. Kowalski said, settling herself at the kitchen table without invitation. "I want to. Those girls, they remind me of my own granddaughters. Except my granddaughters, they live in California with their mother who never calls, so I feed you instead." It was the most personal information Mrs. Kowalski had ever shared. Ethan set the pierogi on the counter and joined her at the table, sensing this visit was about more than food. "Mrs. Kowalski, Elena," she corrected. "If I'm going to keep feeding your children, you call me Elena." "They're not technically my children," Ethan said automatically, then winced at how that sounded. Elena's eyebrows rose. "No? Then whose children are they? Because every day I see you walk them to school. Every evening I hear you helping with homework through these thin walls. Every night I see their light go on when one of them has nightmares, and you go to them. So tell me, Ethan Miller, if they are not your children, what are they?" The question hit harder than it should have. What were they? Foster placements with an expiration date? Temporary responsibilities? Children he was caring for until someone better came along? Or were they what Ava's drawing suggested? Family, assembled from broken pieces, but family nonetheless? "I don't know," Ethan admitted quietly. "I'm dying, Elena. In a few months, I won't be able to care for them anymore, and I have no idea where they'll go after that." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded on the table in front of her. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Ethan had ever heard it. "My husband. He died 12 years ago. Cancer, like you. He was sick for 8 months. Those 8 months, they were the hardest of my life. But also," she paused, searching for words, "also the most precious. Because we knew. We knew our time was short, so we didn't waste it. Every day mattered. Every conversation, every meal, you understand?" Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "So you have a few months," Lena continued. "Maybe less, maybe more, but you have them, and those girls, they have you. Right now, today, that is what matters. The rest," she waved a hand dismissively, "the rest you figure out when you must." "I have 30 days to figure out permanent placement," Ethan said. "According to my lawyer. After that, the state will make the decision for me, and they'll probably split the girls up." Elena's expression hardened. "Then we don't let the state decide." "We? You think I sit in my apartment all day doing nothing?" Elena demanded. "I was a family court advocate for 23 years before I retired. I know how this system works. I know its failures. And I know that sometimes the best solution is not the one in the rule book." Hope flickered in Ethan's chest, dangerous and fragile. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe I'm tired of living alone in an apartment with too many rooms and not enough noise," Elena said. "I'm saying that maybe those girls need more than just a few months with you. They need a plan that extends past your illness. And I'm saying that perhaps an old woman who misses her granddaughters and a dying man with 3 foster daughters could help each other." The implication was staggering. "You want to be their guardian? After I want to make sure they stay together," Elena corrected. "Whether that means I become their guardian, or I help you find someone who will, or we petition for some arrangement the state hasn't thought of yet. But sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves accomplishes nothing. We act or we fail. Which will it be?" Before Ethan could answer, the girls tumbled into the kitchen, backpacks bouncing, hair still damp from their rushed showers. They stopped short when they saw Elena, their expressions shifting from surprise to pleasure. "Mrs. Kowalski!" Nora exclaimed. "Did you bring more of those cookies?" "Pierogi today," Elena said, her stern expression melting into something warm. "For after school, yes? If you eat good lunch and do good work." "We always do good work," June said, though she smiled as she said it. Ava approached the table more cautiously. "Are you here about the noise? We've been trying to be quieter, but sometimes we forget, and—" "The noise is perfect," Elena interrupted. "An apartment should have noise. It should have life. I was just telling Ethan that I miss having children around." The girls exchanged glances, that silent communication they'd perfected. Then Ava, brave as always, asked the question they were all thinking. Do you have grandchildren? I do, Elena said. 2 girls about your age, but they live very far away, and their mother, my daughter, she is very busy. So I don't see them often. That's sad, Nora said with the blunt honesty of childhood. If we had a grandmother, we'd want to see her all the time. Something shifted in Elena's expression, a crack in her carefully maintained composure. Well, she said briskly, standing and smoothing her skirt, perhaps you 3 could visit me sometimes. I have cookies I baked yesterday that need eating, and I'm not supposed to have sugar. Doctor's orders. The girls lit up. Even June looked interested. Really? Ava asked. We could visit? If Ethan says yes, Elena said, looking at him expectantly. Ethan felt the weight of the moment, the significance of what was happening. Elena wasn't just offering cookies, she was offering connection, continuity, a bridge between his limited time and their uncertain future. She was offering exactly what Sarah had told him to find, someone who could be there when he couldn't. I think that would be wonderful, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. The girls cheered. Elena nodded, satisfied, and shooed them toward the door. Go, go, or you'll be late for school. The pierogi will be here when you return. After they left in a whirlwind of hugs and promises to work hard, Elena turned back to Ethan. We should talk to your lawyer, today, if possible. The paperwork for this kind of arrangement, it takes time, and time is something you don't have to waste. Elena, I can't ask you to. This is a huge commitment. 3 children, full-time, potentially for years. Are you sure you— I'm 72 years old, Elena interrupted. I have excellent health, a stable income from my pension, and an apartment 2 floors up with 3 empty bedrooms gathering dust. More importantly, I have experience with children in crisis. I know what those girls need. And I know what you need. Peace of mind that they'll be cared for when you can't do it yourself. Why? Ethan asked. Why would you do this for strangers? Elena's expression softened. Because 12 years ago, when my husband was dying, our neighbor, a woman I barely knew, took care of me. She brought meals, she sat with me during treatments, she held my hand when he died. I asked her the same question you're asking me. You know what she said? Ethan shook his head. She said, because someone did it for me once, and someday you'll do it for someone else. So here I am, doing it for someone else. For you, for those girls. Because that's how we survive the hard things. We help each other through them. Ethan's eyes burned. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain composure. I don't know what to say. Say you'll call your lawyer, Elena said practically. Say we'll meet tomorrow to discuss logistics. Say we'll make a plan that gives those girls stability, even when the world keeps trying to take it away. Okay, Ethan said. Okay, I'll call Sarah today. Elena nodded, collected her empty dish, and headed for the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. Ethan, those girls are lucky to have you. Don't forget that. And when the hard days come, and they will come, you remember that love doesn't require longevity. Sometimes the greatest impact comes from the shortest time. My husband, he had 8 months, but those 8 months changed me forever. She left, the door clicking softly behind her, leaving Ethan alone with hope he hadn't dared to feel and a phone call he needed to make. Sarah answered on the second ring. Please tell me you have good news. I think I do, Ethan said, and explained Elena's offer. The silence on the other end lasted so long, Ethan thought they'd been disconnected. Then Sarah let out a long breath. Ethan, this might actually work. Actually, a retired family court advocate with experience in foster care? Mrs. Chen would take that seriously. We could petition for a gradual transition plan, where Elena becomes increasingly involved in their care over the next few months, then assumes full guardianship when you— She caught herself. When it becomes necessary. You really think it's possible? I think it's the best shot we've got, Sarah said, but we need to move fast. I'll draw up the paperwork today. Can you and Elena meet me tomorrow? I want to go over everything before we present it to Mrs. Chen. Tomorrow works, Ethan confirmed. Sarah, thank you for everything. I know this case is exactly why I became a lawyer, Sarah interrupted. to help people when the system fails them, to find solutions that put children first. So stop thanking me and start preparing yourself for a lot of very tedious meetings and paperwork." Ethan laughed, surprising himself. "I can handle tedious." "Good, because tedious is all we've got until this is finalized. I'll text you a time for tomorrow. And Ethan, don't get too hopeful yet. We still have to convince Mrs. Chen, the review board, and probably a judge. But at least now we have a plan." A plan. It was more than he'd had an hour ago, more than he'd thought possible. That afternoon, Ethan picked the girls up from school as usual, but instead of going straight home, he made a detour. "We're making a stop," he announced. "Mrs. Kowalski invited you for cookies. How do you feel about that?" The chorus of enthusiasm was unanimous and loud. Elena's apartment was 2 floors up and significantly larger than Ethan's. Where his space was sparse and functional, hers was filled with warmth. Photographs on every surface, plants on every windowsill, Afghans draped over comfortable furniture. The girls took it all in with wide eyes. "Welcome, welcome," Elena ushered them in. "Shoes off, please. Cookies are in the kitchen. But first, I want to show you something." She led them down a hallway to a room Ethan had never seen. It was painted pale yellow, with 3 twin beds arranged against the walls, 3 dressers, and 3 small desks near the window. The beds were made with colorful quilts, books lined shelves on the walls. Stuffed animals sat on the pillows. "This was my daughter's room," Elena explained. "And when my granddaughters visited, they stayed here. But they haven't visited in 3 years. So the room, it sits empty, waiting." The girls stood in the doorway, uncertain. Nora was the first to speak. "It's beautiful. Your granddaughters must love it." "They did," Elena said. "But now they're in California, being busy, and this room is sad and lonely. I was thinking, if Ethan agrees, perhaps you 3 could use it sometimes, for visits, for sleepovers, for when you need a place that's not so crowded as his small apartment." Ava looked at Ethan, seeking permission. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "We could really stay here?" June asked, her skepticism warring with hope. "If you wanted to," Elena said. "I know I'm not your grandmother, I know I'm just a neighbor, but I have this room, and I have time, and I think maybe we could help each other. What do you say?" The girls didn't answer with words. Instead, they swarmed Elena in a group hug that nearly knocked her over. She laughed, a sound of pure joy, and hugged them back fiercely. Over their heads, she met Ethan's eyes. The message was clear. These children needed more than temporary. They needed permanent, and she was offering to be that permanence. Later, after cookies and stories and a tour of Elena's impressive collection of mystery novels, Ethan and the girls returned to their own apartment. The girls were animated, talking over each other about the room, the cookies, how nice Mrs. Kowalski was. Ethan listened, his heart full and breaking simultaneously. That night, after the girls were asleep, he sat at his laptop and began writing. Not for work, not for lawyers, but for them. A letter for each girl, to be read when he was gone. Words he needed them to know, truths he needed them to carry. "Dear Ava," he wrote, "you are braver than you know. When I first met you, you spoke for your sisters because you knew they needed a voice. That kindness, that strength, never lose it. The world needs people like you. Dear Nora, you taught me that hope isn't naive, it's courageous. You choose to see possibility when others see only loss. That gift will carry you through hard times. Keep choosing hope, even when it's difficult. Dear June, you are the strongest person I've ever met. Your walls, your skepticism, your refusal to accept easy comfort, those aren't weaknesses, they're survival skills. But remember that letting people in isn't weakness either. It's the bravest thing you can do." The words blurred as Ethan typed, his eyes burning. These girls had changed him in ways he was still discovering. They'd given him purpose when he'd thought his life was over. They'd given him family when he'd resigned himself to dying alone. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved them from separation, but they'd saved him from something worse. From a slow, lonely decline into nothing. From spending his final months measuring his life in doctor's appointments and pain medication. They'd given him a reason to fight, to wake up, to matter. But fighting didn't stop the disease from progressing. The first chemotherapy session hit him harder than expected. Sarah had rescheduled it 3 times, trying to find a slot that wouldn't interfere with school pickups or Elena's availability, but finally they'd run out of delays. The oncologist had been clear. Without treatment, Ethan had months. With treatment, maybe he'd get a year. Maybe. He'd chosen treatment. For the girls. For time. But time came with a price. The nausea was immediate and unrelenting. Ethan made it home from the hospital and directly to the bathroom, where he stayed for the next 4 hours. Elena took the girls straight from school to her apartment, fed them dinner, helped with homework, all while Ethan's body tried to reject the poison meant to save him. When he finally emerged, weak and shaking, Elena was waiting in his kitchen with ginger tea and crackers. "The girls?" he asked hoarsely. "Asleep upstairs in their room," Elena said. "They wanted to see you, but I told them you needed rest. Tomorrow, you can reassure them. Tonight, you take care of yourself." "I can't keep doing this," Ethan said, collapsing into a chair. "The treatments are going to get worse. I can't be there for them when I'm like this." "So you're not there for them," Elena said practically. "I am. That's what a support system means, Ethan. You don't have to do everything alone anymore." But alone was what Ethan knew. Alone was safe. Alone meant not disappointing anyone when he inevitably failed. "What if it's not enough?" he asked quietly. "What if the treatment doesn't work? What if I can't make it to the end of the 60 days? What if the sky falls tomorrow?" Elena interrupted sharply. "What if the sun doesn't rise? What if we spend so much time worrying about what might happen that we miss what is happening?" She set the tea in front of him with more force than necessary. "You want guarantees? Life doesn't give guarantees. It gives you today. So drink your tea, rest your body, and tomorrow you get up and try again." The treatment schedule was brutal. Every 2 weeks, 8 hours in a chair while poison dripped into his veins. Then 3 days of recovery where his body felt like it belonged to someone else. Sarah and Elena coordinated around his bad days, creating a schedule that ensured the girls were never without supervision, never saw him at his worst. But children were perceptive. They noticed the weight loss, the fatigue, the way Ethan sometimes winced when he moved too quickly. They noticed and worried in that silent, consuming way that children worry about the adults they depend on. It was Nora who finally confronted him, 3 weeks into the treatment regimen. She appeared in his doorway one evening while her sisters were watching a movie with Elena upstairs, her expression determined and afraid. "You're getting sicker," she said without preamble. "The medicine is supposed to make you better, but you're getting worse." Ethan had been dreading this conversation. The medicine is fighting the cancer. Sometimes the fight looks like getting worse before it gets better. "Don't lie to me," Nora said, and her voice cracked. "Please. Everyone always lies to make us feel better, but it doesn't help. Not knowing is worse. So please, just tell me the truth. Are you dying?" The question hung between them, stark and unavoidable. Ethan could have softened it, could have offered false hope or vague reassurances, but Nora deserved better than that. They all did. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm dying. The treatment might slow it down, might give me more time, but it won't cure me. I'm sorry, Nora. I'm so sorry." Nora nodded, accepting the truth with a composure that broke Ethan's heart. "How long?" "I don't know. Months, probably. Maybe longer if the treatment works well. And then what happens to us?" This at least Ethan could answer with hope instead of certainty. "Then Elena becomes your guardian. She's already started the paperwork. By the time it's necessary, she'll be ready to take care of you, all 3 of you, together." "You promise?" Nora whispered. "You promise we won't be separated?" "I promise," Ethan said. "That's the one thing I can guarantee. Whatever happens to me, you 3 stay together." Nora was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she climbed onto the couch next to him, curled into his side like she used to when she was younger. "I'm glad it was you," she said softly. "In the hospital. I'm glad you were the one who said yes." Ethan's arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "Me too." They sat like that until Elena brought the other girls down, until bedtime routines demanded attention, until the moment passed into memory. But something had shifted. The truth was out, acknowledged. No more pretending everything was fine, no more lying to spare feelings. The girls knew. And knowing, they adapted. Ava started taking on more household responsibilities without being asked, folding laundry and packing lunches and making sure everyone had clean clothes for school. June became fiercely protective, glaring at anyone who looked at Ethan wrong, positioning herself between him and the world like a tiny, determined guard dog. Nora appointed herself as the family emotional barometer, checking in with everyone, making sure no one was suffering in silence. They were preparing for loss the way children do, by trying to control what they could, by making themselves useful, by refusing to be caught off guard again. Elena, meanwhile, had thrown herself into the guardianship paperwork with single-minded determination. She met with Sarah 3 times a week, attended every meeting with Mrs. Chen, submitted to background checks and home studies and interviews with the kind of patience Ethan couldn't muster. Mrs. Chen, to her credit, took the proposal seriously. She visited Elena's apartment, interviewed the girls, reviewed every piece of documentation Sarah provided, and slowly, cautiously, she began to approve the transition plan. "This is highly unusual," she told them during a meeting in her office, 6 weeks into the arrangement. "Transferring guardianship while the current foster parent is still living. But given the circumstances and given Ms. Kowalski's qualifications, I'm willing to support it, provisionally." "Provisionally?" Sarah asked. "The girls need to want this," Mrs. Chen said, looking at Ava, Nora, and June, who sat pressed together on the office couch. "This isn't a decision adults get to make for them, so I need to hear from you 3. Do you want Miss Kowalski to be your guardian after Mr. Miller can no longer care for you?" The girls looked at each other, that silent communication. Then they looked at Elena, who sat with her hands folded, trying to project calm confidence. Finally, they looked at Ethan, seeking permission or reassurance or something he wasn't sure he could give. "It's your choice," he told them. "Whatever you want, that's what we'll fight for." June spoke first, which surprised everyone. "Mrs. Kowalski has cookies," she said seriously, "and she doesn't make us talk about our feelings all the time. And she knows how to braid hair better than Ethan does. Mrs. Kowalski lets us help her cook," Nora added, "and she tells stories about when she was young, and her apartment has better light for drawing." Ava, always the most thoughtful, took longer to answer. "Mrs. Kowalski is kind," she finally said, "but she's also honest. She doesn't pretend things are okay when they're not. And she promised we'd stay together, so yes, we want her to be our guardian." Mrs. Chen made notes, her expression unreadable. "And you understand that this means when Mr. Miller becomes too ill to care for you, you'll move in with Mrs. Kowalski permanently? That this isn't temporary?" "Nothing is permanent," June said, with the cynicism of a child who'd learned that lesson too early. "But together is better than apart. So if Mrs. Kowalski keeps us together, then yes. We understand." Mrs. Chen looked at Elena. "Are you prepared for this responsibility? 3 children, full-time, potentially for the next decade or more?" "I'm prepared," Elena said firmly. "I have the space, the resources, and the experience. More importantly, I have the desire. These girls need stability, and I can provide it." "And the emotional aspect?" Mrs. Chen pressed. "You'll be taking in 3 children who've experienced profound trauma, who are about to lose another parental figure, who will need extensive support as they grieve and adjust. That's not a small undertaking." "I was a court advocate for 23 years, Elena said. "I've worked with hundreds of children in crisis. I understand what trauma looks like, and I know how to support healing. But more than that, I care about these specific children, not as a job, not as charity, but as family. That's the difference." Mrs. Chen studied Elena for a long moment, then turned to Ethan. "And you, Mr. Miller? You're comfortable with this arrangement?" Comfortable wasn't the word Ethan would have chosen. Grateful, relieved, heartbroken that it was necessary. Those were closer to the truth. But comfortable? No. Nothing about dying and leaving behind 3 children he'd accidentally come to love was comfortable. "I trust Elena completely," he said instead. "And I know the girls will be in good hands." Mrs. Chen made more notes, asked more questions, created more paperwork. But by the end of the meeting, she'd given preliminary approval. Pending final home studies and court review, Elena Kowalski would become the legal guardian of Ava, Nora, and June Miller when Ethan was no longer able to care for them. Miller. Not their birth name, but the name they'd taken on forms and documents because it was easier than explaining. the name that in some strange way had become real through use. They were his girls now, in every way that mattered except biology. The final court date was set for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks to finalize paperwork, complete evaluations, and ensure everything was legally sound. 6 weeks that felt simultaneously too long and not nearly long enough. Because the treatment, despite the brutal side effects, wasn't working the way the oncologist had hoped. The scans at week 8 showed progression, not regression. The cancer was spreading, adapting, winning. "We can try a more aggressive protocol," Dr. Matthews said, reviewing the images with Ethan in an exam room that smelled like antiseptic and defeat. "But I need you to understand the side effects will be significantly worse. You're already struggling with the current regimen. Increasing the dosage—" "Will it give me more time?" Ethan interrupted. "Maybe. A few months if it works, but the quality of that time—" "I need to make it to the court date," Ethan said. "I need to see this through. After that, I don't care about quality. But I need those 6 weeks." Dr. Matthews was quiet, choosing his words carefully. "I can't guarantee 6 weeks, even with aggressive treatment. The cancer is advanced. We're past the point of control. We're just trying to slow it down." "Then slow it down," Ethan said desperately. "Do whatever you have to do. I just need 6 more weeks." The new protocol nearly killed him. Elena moved into his apartment after the first treatment because Ethan couldn't be left alone. The girls slept upstairs in their designated room, coming down for breakfast and after school, but spared the worst of what the treatment did to him. Elena managed it all with quiet competence. The medications, the meals, the careful monitoring of symptoms that indicated when they needed to call the doctor. Sarah pushed the court date up by 2 weeks when she saw how quickly Ethan was deteriorating. Mrs. Chen expedited the paperwork. Everyone involved in the case seemed to understand they were racing against time. The morning of the court hearing, Ethan could barely stand. Elena had to help him dress, had to support his weight as they walked to the car. But he was conscious, coherent, and determined. He'd made it. 4 weeks instead of 6, but he'd made it. The courtroom was small, informal. Just Judge Patricia Warren, Mrs. Chen, Sarah, Elena, and the girls. The judge reviewed the paperwork with careful attention, asked Elena questions about her plans and resources, spoke gently with each of the girls to confirm their wishes. Then she turned to Ethan. "Mr. Miller, I've read your statement. I understand you're terminally ill and you're requesting the court approve Miss Kowalski as permanent guardian for these children. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan managed, his voice weak but steady. "And you believe this arrangement is in the children's best interest?" "I know it is," Ethan said. "These girls have lost too much already. They need stability, they need consistency, and most importantly, they need each other. Elena can provide all of that." Judge Warren made notes, reviewed more documents, conferred quietly with Mrs. Chen. The wait felt eternal. Every second waited with possibility and fear. The girls clutched each other's hands, their faces pale but hopeful. Elena sat with perfect posture, betraying nothing of the nervousness Ethan knew she felt. Finally, Judge Warren looked up. "The court has reviewed all submitted documentation and finds Ms. Elena Kowalski to be a suitable guardian for the minor children Ava, Nora, and June Miller. Guardianship is hereby granted, effective immediately, with provisions for transition support as outlined in the care plan. Mr. Miller will retain rights to make decisions regarding the children's welfare as long as he is able, with full authority transferring to Mrs. Kowalski when he becomes incapacitated or upon his death. This court commends all parties for putting these children's needs first and working together to create a stable placement that maintains sibling unity." The gavel came down. It was done. Ethan sagged in his chair, relief and exhaustion overwhelming him. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. Elena's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. The girls erupted in whispered celebration, hugging each other and then swarming Elena in a mass embrace. They'd done it. Against every obstacle, every policy, every piece of bad luck, they'd done it. The girls would stay together. Mrs. Chen approached as they were gathering their things to leave. "Mr. Miller, I want you to know this was the right outcome. I've been doing this job for 10 years and I've seen a lot of cases go wrong. But this one went right. Those girls are lucky to have you, both of you." "I'm the lucky one," Ethan said, and meant it. The celebration that night was subdued but genuine. Elena made the girls' favorite dinner. They ate together around Ethan's small table, talking and laughing and trying not to think about what came next. Because what came next was the hard part. The part where Ethan's role transitioned from active to advisory, where Elena took over day-to-day care, where everyone prepared for an ending that was approaching faster than anyone wanted to acknowledge. But that night, they didn't think about endings. They thought about what they'd accomplished, what they'd built, what they'd become. 4 people who'd started as strangers, bound together by a lie that had transformed into truth. A family forged in crisis and legitimized by a judge's gavel. Ethan looked around the table at faces that had become familiar, beloved. Ava with her gentle wisdom, Nora with her irrepressible hope, June with her fierce loyalty, Elena with her steadfast strength. This was his family, not by blood, not by law initially, but by choice. By showing up. By staying. Rachel had asked him not to spend his life alone. He'd kept that promise in ways he never expected. And now, as his time ran short, he could rest knowing these girls wouldn't be alone either. They had each other. They had Elena. They had a future that extended beyond him. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because 2 weeks later, Ethan's body finally gave out. The collapse happened on a Wednesday morning while Ethan was attempting to make coffee, a simple task that had become increasingly difficult as his strength faded. One moment he was standing at the counter, the next he was on the floor, his legs simply refusing to hold him anymore. He didn't remember falling. He only remembered Elena's face appearing above him, her usual composure cracking into something close to panic. "I'm calling an ambulance," she said, already reaching for her phone. "No," Ethan managed. "The girls, they can't see." "The girls are at school," Elena reminded him, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "And you need a hospital, no arguments." There were no arguments left in him. The fight had taken everything he had, and now his body was demanding payment for the borrowed time. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their questions blurring together as they checked vitals and loaded him onto a stretcher. Elena rode in the ambulance, her hand gripping his with surprising strength for a woman her age. "You're not allowed to die yet," she told him fiercely. "Not before you say goodbye properly. Those girls deserve that much." Ethan wanted to promise, wanted to assure her he'd hold on, but promises required certainty he didn't possess. Instead, he squeezed her hand and hoped it was enough. The hospital became his world for the next 72 hours. Dr. Matthews confirmed what they all already knew. The aggressive treatment had failed. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. Ethan's body was shutting down in stages, each system struggling and failing in turn. They could make him comfortable, the doctor said. That was all that remained. Comfortable meant morphine, meant giving up the fight, meant acknowledging the end. But it also meant coherence for a few more days, enough to matter, enough to say the things that needed saying. Sarah came first, her professional armor finally cracking when she saw him in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors creating a cage around what was left of him. "I should have pushed harder for the treatment," she said, and Ethan could hear the guilt in her voice. "Should have found better doctors, better options." "You gave me time," Ethan interrupted, his voice weak but firm. 4 months. That's 4 months I wouldn't have had. 4 months with them. Don't you dare feel guilty about that. Sarah nodded, blinking rapidly. "The guardianship is solid. Elena has everything she needs. The girls are protected, legally and practically. You did it, Ethan. You kept your promise." "Make sure they know," Ethan said, "when I'm gone. Make sure they understand it wasn't their fault. That loving them didn't make this worse. It made everything better." "I'll tell them," Sarah promised. "Every day if I have to." Elena came next, and then came every day after, spending hours in the chair beside his bed while the girls were at school, knitting or reading or simply sitting in companionable silence. She'd become more than a neighbor, more than a guardian designate. She'd become family in the truest sense, the person who showed up when showing up was hard, who stayed when staying hurt. "I'm scared," Ethan admitted one afternoon when the morphine made honesty easier than pride. "Not of dying. I made peace with that. But of leaving them. Of not being there when they need me." "You'll always be there," Elena said, not looking up from her knitting. "Not physically, perhaps. But the foundation you gave them, the safety, the love, the proof that someone would fight for them, that doesn't disappear when you do. That stays. That matters. What if it's not enough? It's never enough, Elena said simply. Every parent, biological or chosen, eventually leaves. Through death or distance or simply growing up. The question isn't whether you'll leave, it's what you leave behind. And Ethan, you're leaving behind 3 girls who know they're worth fighting for, who know love doesn't have conditions or expiration dates, who know family is something you build, not something you're born into. That's more than enough. The girls weren't allowed to visit initially. Hospital policy for the ICU, combined with Dr. Matthews' concern about traumatizing them with the sight of Ethan hooked to machines. But on the 4th day, when it became clear time was measured in days rather than weeks, exceptions were made. Elena prepared them carefully. Ethan heard about it later, how she'd sat them down in their yellow bedroom and explained that Ethan was very sick, that he looked different than they remembered, that he might be sleepy or confused, but he was still himself underneath. How she'd given them the choice to visit or to remember him as he'd been, and how all 3 had insisted on coming. They arrived that evening dressed in their favorite clothes like they were going somewhere important. Ava wore the blue dress she'd picked out for the guardianship hearing. Nora had on the sweater with stars that she claimed brought good luck. June, in uncharacteristic defiance of her usual dark colors, wore a yellow shirt that matched the walls of Elena's guest room. They stopped in the doorway when they saw him, their expressions shifting from nervous determination to shock. Ethan knew what they saw. A man who'd lost 40 pounds in 4 months, skin stretched over bones, attached to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. He looked like dying, because he was. "Hi," he said, and his voice came out rough, damaged by the oxygen tube. "Come in, please." They approached slowly, uncertainty in every step, until they were clustered around his bed like they'd clustered around him in that hospital hallway 4 months ago. 4 months that felt like a lifetime. 4 months that had changed everything. "You look terrible," June said bluntly, and Ethan laughed despite the pain it caused. "Yeah, I do," he agreed. "But I'm still me. Still here. Still so glad you came." Ava reached out tentatively and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his carefully, avoiding the IV line. "Does it hurt?" "Not as much as you'd think," Ethan lied. The morphine helped, but pain had become his constant companion, a reminder that his body was giving up piece by piece. "The doctors are good at managing it." Nora climbed into the chair beside the bed, making herself as close as hospital furniture allowed. "Mrs. Kowalski said you wanted to see us, that you had things to tell us." This was it. The moment Ethan had been rehearsing in his head during the long, quiet hours of the night. The goodbye he needed to say while he still could. "I wanted to tell you that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me," Ethan began, and his voice cracked. "I know that sounds strange. I was dying when we met. I'm still dying, but before you 3 appeared in that hallway, I was just existing, waiting for the end. You gave me a reason to fight, to live fully in the time I had left. And I need you to understand, loving you didn't make dying harder. It made living matter." Ava's eyes filled with tears. Nora's hand found June's, gripping tight. June's jaw set in that stubborn line, like she could argue with death itself if she tried hard enough. "I also wanted to tell you that what happens next, after I'm gone, isn't an ending," Ethan continued. "It's a transition. You're going to live with Elena, and she's going to take care of you the way I would if I could. Better, probably, because she actually knows what she's doing. And you're going to grow up strong and brave and whole, because that's who you already are. Cancer took your parents. It's taking me. But it doesn't get to take your future. That's yours. And it's going to be beautiful." "How do you know?" June demanded, and her voice was thick with unshed tears. "How do you know it'll be beautiful when everything keeps getting taken away?" "Because you have each other," Ethan said simply. "Because you know how to hold on when things get hard. Because you asked a stranger for help in a hospital and trusted him when you had every reason not to. That courage, that faith in the possibility of good things, that's what makes futures beautiful. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of people who love you through it." Nora was crying openly now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. I don't want you to die. We just found you. It's not fair. No, Ethan agreed. It's not fair. It's not fair that you lost your parents. It's not fair that you're losing me. It's not fair that you've had to be so brave so young. But fairness isn't something we get to demand from life. We only get to choose how we respond to unfairness. And you three? You're choosing to stay together, to keep loving, to keep trying. That's the bravest response I can imagine. June finally broke, her composure shattering. She pressed her face against the side of the bed, her shoulders shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for months. Ava and Nora moved to her immediately, wrapping their arms around their sister, creating a protective circle that made Ethan's heart ache with pride and grief. I have something for each of you, Ethan said when the crying had subsided into sniffles. Elena, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, came forward with the bag she'd brought from the apartment. From it, she pulled 3 envelopes, handing one to each girl. These are letters, Ethan explained. One for each of you. Inside is everything I wanted to say but might not have time to, and also, he paused, gathering strength, also something from my wife, Rachel. Before she died, she wrote letters too, for moments when I needed her and she couldn't be there. I've been saving her last letter for when it mattered most. I want you to have it. Not instead of mine, but with mine. Because she would have loved you. She would have been so proud of what we built together. The girls clutched their envelopes like precious artifacts. Elena had decorated them, Ethan noticed. Small drawings on each one, personalized. Stars for Nora, flowers for Ava, abstract patterns for June, small touches that showed how much Elena already understood about who these girls were. You don't have to read them now, Ethan said. Save them for when you need them. For hard days or important moments or just because you want to hear my voice again. Will you read us one? Nora asked suddenly. Just one? So we know what they sound like in your real voice? Ethan's throat tightened. Elena helped him open Nora's envelope, helped him unfold the letter he'd written weeks ago in preparation for this moment. His hands shook, making the paper rattle, but he managed to read. Dear Nora, he began, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But I need you to know that every day with you is a gift. You taught me that hope isn't about ignoring reality. It's about believing in possibility despite reality. When I wanted to give up, you showed me reasons to keep trying. When everything felt dark, you found light. Never lose that, Nora. The world needs people who choose hope when hope seems impossible. And I need you to remember that loving me, missing me, grieving me, none of that makes you weak. It makes you human. It makes you whole. Cry when you need to, laugh when you can, and know that somewhere, somehow, I'm cheering for you, always. Love, Ethan. The room was silent, except for quiet crying. Elena handed Ethan tissues, her own eyes suspiciously bright. The girls pressed closer, as if proximity could somehow anchor him to life, could prevent the inevitable separation. They stayed for 2 more hours, talking about small things and big things, and everything in between. The girls told him about school, about a science project Ava was working on, about how June had stood up to a bully who was bothering a smaller kid, about Nora's increasingly elaborate drawings that were covering every available surface in Elena's apartment. Normal things, beautiful things, evidence that life was continuing even as his was ending. When visiting hours ended and a nurse gently reminded them it was time to go, the goodbye was wrenching. Each girl hugged him carefully, mindful of the tubes and wires, whispering their own private words. Then Elena ushered them out, promising they'd return tomorrow, knowing but not saying that tomorrow might be too late. Ethan watched them go, watched 3 small figures walk down the hospital corridor, holding hands, supporting each other through one more loss, and he felt something unexpected, peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but peace. He'd done what he needed to do. He'd kept his promise. Those girls would be okay. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. They had Elena. They had each other. They had the foundation he and Elena had built together, the proof that families could be chosen, that love didn't require biology, that showing up mattered more than perfection. That night, alone in his hospital room with only machines for company, Ethan pulled out Rachel's last letter. The envelope was worn from being carried in his wallet for 3 years, opened and reread during the darkest moments of his grief. Inside was a single page, Rachel's handwriting elegant despite the tremor of illness. "My dearest Ethan," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're facing something hard. I wish I could be there to help you through it, but since I can't, I want to remind you of something we learned together during my illness. Life isn't measured in length, but in depth, in connections made, in love given and received, in moments that matter. You and I had 23 years together. Some would say that's not enough, but I say it was everything because we filled those years with meaning. We chose each other every single day. We built a life that mattered, and that life doesn't end just because I'm not physically in it anymore. It continues through you, through the choices you make, through the love you give to others. So whatever you're facing right now, whatever seems impossible, remember this: you are braver than you know, stronger than you feel, and more loved than you can imagine. Not just by me, though I love you beyond words, but by everyone whose life you've touched, by everyone you've helped, by everyone who knows the real you, the kind, stubborn, beautiful man I was lucky enough to call mine. Don't waste your remaining time being afraid. Don't hide from connection because you're worried about loss. Loss is inevitable. Love is the choice we make in spite of that inevitability. So choose love, Ethan, always. Until we meet again, Rachel." Ethan folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. Rachel had written this 3 years ago, not knowing he'd eventually face his own diagnosis, his own impossible choice. But her words fit perfectly. Choose love despite loss. Fill life with meaning despite its brevity. Connect despite the pain of eventual separation. He'd done that. With 3 terrified girls in a hospital hallway, he'd chosen love. And that choice had given his final months purpose, meaning connection that transformed dying from a lonely descent into something else entirely. Something that mattered. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of morphine and visitors and gradual shutdown. Sarah came with paperwork that didn't really need signing, but gave her an excuse to sit beside him. Mrs. Chen came to tell him that the adoption paperwork was being expedited, that the girl's last name would officially become Miller within the month. Coworkers came, neighbors came. Even Dr. Matthews came, on his day off, to sit quietly and bear witness to an ending he couldn't prevent. And always, Elena was there, sitting in her chair, knitting endless scarves that would never be worn, reading mystery novels aloud when Ethan couldn't focus on conversation, simply existing as a steady presence in the chaos of dying. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan asked her on one of his more lucid afternoons. "You barely knew me before all this. You could have walked away at any point. So why stay?" Elena set down her knitting and looked at him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Because 12 years ago, a stranger stayed with me when my husband was dying, and she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'We don't stay because it's easy. We stay because leaving makes us smaller, and staying makes us more human.' So I stay because it makes me more human, Ethan. Because bearing witness to someone's ending is an honor, not a burden. Because you gave my life purpose again when I'd resigned myself to lonely irrelevance. You and those 3 girls, you reminded me that I still have something to offer, that my life isn't over just because I'm old, that family is something we create every single day through small acts of showing up." "Thank you," Ethan whispered, "for everything, for them, for being what they need when I can't be." "They'll remember you," Elena said. "Maybe not every detail, maybe not every conversation, but they'll remember how you made them feel safe, chosen, worth fighting for, and they'll carry that with them forever." The girls came every day after school, bringing homework and stories and drawings that they taped to the walls until the sterile hospital room looked like a kindergarten classroom. They talked to him even when he couldn't respond, filling the silence with chatter about normal things, refusing to let dying be the only thing that defined their time together. On the 6th day, Ethan's doctor pulled Elena aside. Ethan knew what was being said without hearing the words. Hours, not days. Maybe one more night. Possibly not even that. Elena returned to her chair and took Ethan's hand. "The girls want to stay tonight, all night. The nurses said they'd make an exception. Would that be okay?" Ethan couldn't speak anymore. The morphine was too heavy, his body too tired, but he squeezed Elena's hand once. Yes. Please don't let me die alone. The girls arrived at 8, already in their pajamas, carrying pillows and blankets. The hospital staff brought in a cot, set up a makeshift sleeping area in the corner. Ava, Nora, and June arranged themselves like they did everything, together, supporting each other, a unit. Elena dimmed the lights. Someone put on soft music. And in that quiet hospital room, with machines beeping their mechanical lullaby, a family gathered for their last night together. The girls took turns sitting beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand, talking to him about everything and nothing. Ava told him about her science project on butterflies, about how caterpillars completely dissolve in their cocoons before becoming something new. Nora showed him her latest drawing, a portrait of the 5 of them, Elena included, standing in front of a house that looked like home. June, ever practical, read to him from a book they'd been working through together, her voice steady, despite the tears that occasionally interrupted the words. Somewhere around midnight, Ethan's breathing changed. Elena noticed first, her hand tightening on his. She didn't wake the girls, who'd finally fallen asleep in their makeshift bed, exhausted from emotion and the late hour. Instead, she moved her chair closer and leaned in. "It's okay to go," she whispered. "The girls are safe. They're together. You kept your promise. You can rest now." Ethan's eyes opened one last time, unfocused but aware. He looked at Elena, at the 3 sleeping girls, at the family he'd built in the margins of dying. And he felt it again, that unexpected peace, that sense of completion. He'd been so afraid of dying alone, so terrified that his life would end the way it had been before that hospital hallway, empty, isolated, meaningless. But this ending was different. This ending was surrounded by love, by people who'd chosen him as surely as he'd chosen them. Rachel had been right. Life wasn't measured in length, but in depth. And these last 4 months had been deeper, fuller, more meaningful than the 3 years of quiet grief that had preceded them. Ethan's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. Elena kept holding his hand, kept bearing witness, kept being present for an ending that hurt, but mattered. At 3:17 in the morning, Ethan Miller died. The machines didn't scream. There was no dramatic moment, just a gradual quieting, a final breath, and then stillness. Elena sat with him for a long moment, saying her own private goodbye to a neighbor who'd become a friend, a partner in an impossible rescue mission, a father to 3 children who desperately needed one. Then she woke the girls gently, prepared them as best she could, and gave them the chance to say their own goodbyes to a man who'd changed their lives by saying yes when he could have walked away. They cried. They held on to him. They told him they loved him. And when the nurses finally came to begin the necessary procedures of death, the girls left the room holding on to Elena, holding on to each other, holding on to the promise that while Ethan was gone, they weren't alone. They would never be alone again. The funeral was small, held at a chapel Elena had chosen because it had good light and comfortable pews and a garden where children could escape if the grief became too much. Sarah spoke about Ethan's courage. Mrs. Chen spoke about his determination to do right by 3 children who'd needed someone to fight for them. Elena spoke about kindness, about how one small decision to help strangers had rippled outward to change multiple lives. The girls didn't speak. They sat in the front row, wearing dresses Elena had helped them pick out, holding hands, crying quietly. But after the service, when people were mingling and sharing stories, Nora approached the lectern with a piece of paper. "We wrote something," she said to no one in particular. "For Ethan. Can I read it?" Elena nodded, encouraging. Nora climbed onto the small platform, her sisters flanking her immediately. They read together, their voices overlapping and supporting each other. "Ethan taught us that family isn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about showing up. It's about saying yes when you could say no. It's about fighting for people even when fighting is hard. He was sick. He was scared. He was dying. But he chose us anyway. He chose to make his last months matter by making sure we'd be okay. And we will be okay. Because he gave us Elena. He gave us each other. He gave us proof that love is stronger than loss. We miss him. We'll always miss him. But we're not broken. We're not alone." were exactly what he and Elena built together, a family. And families don't end just because someone dies. They keep going, they keep choosing each other, they keep being brave. That's what Ethan would want. So that's what we'll do. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Elena wrapped her arms around all three girls, holding them as they cried, as the grief washed over them in waves, as the reality of Ethan's absence became concrete and unavoidable. But underneath the grief was something else, something Ethan had given them in those 4 impossible months. Foundation, proof, evidence that they were worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth loving even when loving came with an expiration date. The girls moved into Elena's apartment the week after the funeral. Their room with the yellow walls became truly theirs, filled with their things, their noise, their life. School continued. Therapy appointments continued. The routines they'd built with Ethan adapted to include Elena instead. It wasn't seamless. There were hard days when the girls lashed out or shut down or tested boundaries to see if Elena would leave too. There were nights when nightmares came, and morning when getting out of bed felt impossible. Grief didn't follow a schedule or resolve neatly, but Elena stayed. She weathered the storms and celebrated the small victories and showed up every single day with patient consistency. She wasn't trying to replace Ethan or their parents. She was simply being present, being steady, being the proof that adults could be trustworthy even after other adults had disappeared. Slowly, painfully, the girls began to heal. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to laugh again, enough to make plans for the future, enough to believe that good things were still possible despite everything they'd lost. And on the hard days, when the grief felt overwhelming, they had Ethan's letters, 3 envelopes, carefully preserved, read and reread until the paper grew soft from handling. Words of encouragement and love and wisdom from a man who'd known them for such a short time but had understood them completely. Ava read hers before her first piano recital, drawing courage from Ethan's reminder that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to try anyway. Nora read hers after a friendship fight that left her doubting whether people were worth the risk of caring, finding comfort in Ethan's insistence that hope was always worth it. June read hers on the anniversary of her parents' death, letting Ethan's words about strength and vulnerability give her permission to cry and to heal simultaneously. And Rachel's letter, which Ethan had given to all 3 of them to share, became a family treasure. Elena read it to them on particularly hard nights. Rachel's words about choosing love despite loss resonating with children who were learning that lesson too young, but learning it nonetheless. Time passed. Seasons changed. The girls grew taller, older, different, but the foundation remained. The proof that Ethan and Elena had given them, that families could be chosen, that love mattered more than biology, that showing up was the most important thing, that stayed constant. They were together. They were safe. They were loved. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Ethan knew. He knew they were okay. He knew his promise had been kept. He knew that his last months of life, spent fighting for 3 girls he'd met by accident, had mattered more than anything else he'd ever done. It hadn't been fair, it hadn't been easy. But it had been right, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The first year without Ethan was the hardest. Elena had expected that, had prepared herself for the waves of grief that would hit the girls at unexpected moments. A song on the radio, a stranger's laugh that sounded like his, the anniversary of his death approaching like a storm on the horizon. What she hadn't expected was her own grief, the way she found herself setting 4 places at the table instead of 4 before catching herself, the way she still glanced toward his old apartment door as if he might walk through it. The adoption became final 3 months after Ethan's death. Judge Warren presided again, her expression solemn as she made official what had already been true in practice. Ava, Nora, and June were legally Elena Kowalski's daughters. The Miller name stayed, partly because the girls had grown attached to it, partly because changing it felt like erasing Ethan, and none of them could bear that. So they became the Miller Kowalskis, a hyphenated family that announced to the world that their history was complicated, their formation unconventional, but their bond unbreakable. School provided structure during those early months. The girls threw themselves into their studies with the intensity of children trying to control something in a world that felt chaotic. Ava discovered a love for science, spending hours in Elena's kitchen conducting experiments that sometimes resulted in minor explosions and always resulted in mess. Nora joined the art club, her drawings becoming more sophisticated, more emotional, processing grief through color and line in ways words couldn't capture. June, surprisingly, gravitated toward theater, finding that pretending to be someone else for a few hours was a relief from the weight of being herself. Elena encouraged all of it, driving them to activities, attending every performance and art show and science fair. She learned the names of their friends, the dynamics of their social groups, the subtle shifts in mood that indicated when one of them was struggling. She became fluent in the language of raising daughters, a language she'd half forgotten since her own daughter had grown up and moved away. That distance, the 3,000 miles between Elena and her biological daughter Christina, became more painful as the girls integrated into her life. Christina called dutifully once a month, conversations that were pleasant but surface level, never quite bridging the gap that had formed over years of missed visits and competing priorities. When Elena had told her about the guardianship, Christina's response had been supportive but distant. "That's very generous of you, Mom," she'd said, her voice tinny over the long-distance connection. "But are you sure you're up for raising 3 young children at your age? Maybe you should consider—" "I'm not considering anything except what those girls need," Elena had interrupted firmly. "And what they need is stability. I can provide that." Christina had dropped the subject, but the unspoken tension remained. Elena tried not to compare, tried not to notice that Ava, Nora, and June showed her more affection in a day than Christina had in years. But the comparison was there, unavoidable and painful. 6 months after Ethan's death, on what would have been his 43rd birthday, the girls asked Elena if they could visit his grave. They'd been only once since the funeral, and that visit had been so consumed by fresh grief that none of them remembered it clearly. This time, they wanted to go with intention, with things to say, with the clarity that came from months of processing loss. Elena drove them to the cemetery on a Saturday morning when the autumn air was crisp and the leaves were turning colors that reminded her of Nora's paintings. They'd stopped at a flower shop on the way, each girl picking out a single bloom, yellow roses for Ava, white lilies for Nora, red carnations for June. Elena had added a bouquet of mixed wildflowers, the kind that grew untamed and resilient. Ethan's headstone was simple, the inscription chosen by Sarah and approved by the girls. Ethan James Miller, beloved father and friend. He chose love. No dates, because the girls had insisted that numbers didn't capture what mattered, just the truth of who he'd been and what he'd done. The girls arranged their flowers with careful precision, each placement meaningful in ways Elena didn't fully understand. Then they sat on the grass, heedless of the damp seeping through their jeans, and talked to him like he was there to listen. Ava went first, telling Ethan about her science fair project on regeneration in starfish, about how she'd won second place and wished he could have seen it. Nora showed him a photograph of her latest painting, an abstract piece in blues and golds that somehow captured the feeling of memory and loss. June, characteristically direct, simply said, "I miss you. It's not fair that you're gone. But I'm trying to be okay anyway, because that's what you'd want." Elena stood back, giving them privacy, but she heard every word, heard the love and anger and grief all tangled together in their voices, heard them processing their loss in the only way they knew how, by continuing to include Ethan in their lives, by refusing to let death mean disappearance. When they finally stood to leave, brushing grass from their clothes, Nora turned to Elena with a question that had clearly been building for months. "Do you think he knows? Wherever he is, do you think he knows we're okay?" Elena considered the question seriously, refusing to offer easy platitudes. "I think if there's any kind of awareness after death, any way for the people we've lost to know what happens to those they loved, then yes, Ethan knows, and he's proud of how brave you've been." "But what if there's nothing?" June challenged. "What if death is just ending? What if all the things we tell him here don't reach anywhere?" "Then it doesn't matter," Elena said gently. "Because the point isn't whether Ethan can hear you. The point is that you need to speak, that processing grief means continuing the relationship even when it's one-sided, that love doesn't end just because someone isn't physically present to receive it. You tell Ethan these things because you need to tell him, not because he needs to hear them." The girls absorbed this, each processing it in their own way. Then Ava reached for Elena's hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months, but still made Elena's heart swell. "Thank you for bringing us, and for staying, and for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Elena said, her voice rough with emotion. "This is what family does. We show up for each other." They drove home in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Elena glanced in the rearview mirror at the three identical faces, noting the small differences that were becoming more pronounced as they grew. Ava's hair was slightly longer. Nora had a new smattering of freckles from spending recess outdoors. June's expression had softened over the months, the hard edges of mistrust worn smooth by consistent care. They were healing, slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably. And Elena was healing too, the loneliness that had defined her retirement years, replaced by the chaos and joy of a house full of children. The second year brought its own challenges. The girls hit a developmental stage where their individuality asserted itself more forcefully, where being triplets felt more like a burden than a bond. They started requesting separate classes at school, different activities, their own spaces. Elena navigated it carefully, encouraging independence while maintaining the connection that had saved them. Ava threw herself into advanced science courses, spending afternoons at the local university's public lab sessions, her curiosity insatiable. She talked about becoming a doctor someday, about understanding the human body well enough to save people the way no one had been able to save Ethan. The ambition was both inspiring and heartbreaking, a 9-year-old child carrying the weight of wanting to cure death itself. Nora's art evolved into something profound, her pieces appearing in local youth exhibitions, catching the attention of teachers who whispered words like prodigy and exceptional talent. But Nora remained grounded, crediting Ethan's encouragement during those early months, his belief that her drawings mattered. She donated a painting to the Children's Hospital where she and her sisters had first met him, a piece titled The Hallway that captured both fear and hope in abstract swirls of color. June discovered a gift for advocacy, her natural skepticism and sharp tongue becoming tools for standing up to injustice. She joined the debate team, argued passionately about social issues, and developed a reputation for being fiercely protective of underdogs. Elena watched her channel grief into purpose, using her own experience of systemic failure to fuel a desire to fix broken systems. They were becoming themselves, these three girls. Not just survivors, not just a unit, but individuals with dreams and talents and personalities that were distinctly their own. It was everything Ethan had wanted for them, everything he'd fought to preserve. In the spring of their second year with Elena, Christina called with unexpected news. "Mom, I'm coming to visit next month. I thought it was time I met these girls you've built your life around." The statement carried undertones of resentment that Elena chose to ignore. "That would be wonderful. The girls have heard stories about you. They're curious." The visit was scheduled for 2 weeks, and Elena found herself nervous in ways she hadn't anticipated. Would Christina understand what she'd built here? Would she see the girls as Elena saw them, as family, not obligation? Would there be judgment about choices made, time devoted, priorities shifted? The girls were equally nervous, preparing for Christina's arrival like they were preparing for an inspection. They cleaned obsessively, practiced their best behavior, worried aloud about making good impressions. Elena tried to reassure them that Christina would love them, but she wasn't entirely certain herself. Christina arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, stepping out of a rental car with the polished appearance of a successful corporate lawyer, designer suit, professional smile, carefully maintained distance. Elena hugged her daughter, feeling the stiffness in Christina's return embrace, the years of separation made tangible in that awkward contact. "You look good, Mom," Christina said, and it sounded like surprise. "Happy." "I am happy," Elena confirmed. "Come inside. The girls are excited to meet you." The girls stood in a careful line in the living room like soldiers awaiting inspection. Elena saw them through Christina's eyes, 3 identical 9-year-olds with serious expressions and uncertain postures, clearly trying too hard to impress. Her heart ached for them, for their desperate desire to be accepted, to be enough. Ava, Nora, June, Elena introduced them. "This is my daughter Christina, your—" She paused, uncertain of the terminology. What was Christina to these girls? Technically, nothing. Functionally, perhaps, A step-aunt? The English language had no word for chosen family complications. Stepsister, Christina supplied, and the word felt wrong, but Elena didn't correct it. It's nice to meet you all. My mom has told me a lot about you. The conversation was stilted, awkward, full of silences that no one knew how to fill. Christina asked polite questions about school and hobbies. The girls gave polite answers. Elena tried to bridge the gap, but felt herself failing, watching two parts of her life circle each other warily. It was June, surprisingly, who broke the ice. "You don't want to be here," she said bluntly, her characteristic directness cutting through the artifice. "You think we're a burden on your mom. You think she should be spending her retirement traveling or doing whatever old people do instead of raising kids, right?" Christina's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine surprise. That's not... It's okay," June continued, her voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "We get it, we weren't planned. We're complicated. But your mom chose us anyway, the same way Ethan chose us. And maybe you think that's crazy or irresponsible or whatever, but it's the best thing that ever happened to us. So you can think we're a burden all you want. We know we're not." The silence that followed was profound. Elena held her breath, waiting for Christina's reaction, ready to intervene if necessary. But Christina surprised her. "You're right," Christina said slowly. "I did think that. When Mom first told me, I thought she was making a mistake, taking on responsibility she didn't need, sacrificing her golden years for children who weren't hers. But looking at her now, looking at all of you," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I can see I was wrong. My mother hasn't looked this alive in years, and you three are clearly thriving, so maybe the burden isn't on her. Maybe it's on me for not understanding what family actually means." Ava's eyes widened. Nora's hand found June's. Elena felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "Family means showing up," Nora said quietly, echoing words she'd heard from both Ethan and Elena countless times. "It means staying even when it's hard. Your mom does that for us every day. Maybe you could do that for her?" Christina's composure finally cracked. She sank into a chair, her professional armor falling away to reveal the daughter Elena remembered from years ago, before distance and resentment had built walls between them. "I'm sorry, Mom, for not being there, for not calling more, visiting more, for letting my life become so busy that I forgot what mattered. You were here grieving Dad, and I was in California building a career, and now you've built this whole new family, and I don't even know how to be part of it." Elena moved to her daughter's side, taking her hand. "You be part of it by being here now, by trying. That's all anyone can do." The 2 weeks that followed transformed Christina's visit from obligation to revelation. She watched Elena with the girls, the patient homework help, the elaborate bedtime routines, the way Elena had learned to read their moods and respond accordingly. She saw the drawings Nora made for Elena, the way Ava shared her scientific discoveries, how June sought Elena's opinion on debate topics. She witnessed a family in action, messy and imperfect, but undeniably real. And slowly, Christina became part of it. She helped with dinner preparation, laughing when Ava's enthusiasm resulted in flower explosions. She attended one of June's debate competitions, cheering loudly from the audience. She sat through a gallery showing of Nora's work, genuinely impressed by her half-sister's talent. "I was jealous," Christina admitted to Elena one evening, after the girls had gone to bed. They sat in the kitchen sharing tea, a ritual Elena had maintained from her marriage. "When you told me about the guardianship, I was jealous that these strangers got the version of you I never had. The attentive mother, the present parent. You were always working when I was growing up, always busy with cases and court dates. I raised myself half the time." Elena absorbed this, the guilt sharp and familiar. "I know. I prioritized my career over you, told myself I was doing it for our family when really I was doing it for myself. And when your father got sick, I finally understood what I'd missed. All those years I could have been present and chose not to be. I'm sorry, Christina. I can't undo those choices, but I'm deeply sorry for them." "These girls are getting the mother I wish I'd had," Christina said, and there was pain in her voice, but also acceptance. "And I could resent that, could stay angry about it, or I could be grateful that you learned from your mistakes with me. that these 3 orphan children are benefiting from the wisdom you gained too late for us. Maybe that's how generational trauma heals, not by changing the past, but by doing better in the present. You're more generous than I deserve, Elena said, her voice thick. Maybe, Christina agreed, but I'm also practical. These girls need you, and watching you with them, I can see that you need them too. So I'm choosing to be glad that you found each other, even if the circumstances were terrible, even if it highlights what I missed. Because what's the alternative? Staying bitter? Maintaining distance? Life's too short for that, Mom. Dad's death taught me that much at least. They sat in silence for a while, years of complicated history settling between them like snow, cold at first, but gradually becoming something that insulated rather than isolated. I'd like to visit more, Christina said eventually. Not as an obligation, but because I want to know them, my sisters. Is that weird? That I think of them as sisters? No weirder than anything else about this situation, Elena said, and they both laughed, the sound genuine and healing. Christina extended her visit by a week, then another, working remotely and discovering that her California life felt less urgent from this distance. She talked about possibly relocating, about her law firm having offices on the East Coast, about wanting to be closer to family now that she understood what family meant. When she finally left, the goodbye was different than the arrival. The girls hugged her without reservation. Christina promised to return for June's next debate, for Nora's art show, for Ava's science fair, and Elena watched her daughter drive away feeling something shift, some old wound beginning to close. The third year brought stability. The crisis had passed. The grief, while still present, had become manageable, integrated into daily life rather than overwhelming it. The girls were thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier when they'd been terrified children in a hospital hallway. Ava won her school's science fair with a project on cellular regeneration, dedicating her presentation to Ethan's memory. Nora's artwork was featured in a citywide youth exhibition, her piece titled Choosing Each Other, selling for an amount that shocked everyone and went directly into her college fund. June led her debate team to regional finals, arguing passionately about reforming the foster care system, her personal experience lending weight to her words. And Elena, at 75, found herself busier and happier than she'd been in decades. She attended parent-teacher conferences, chaperoned field trips, hosted birthday parties that filled her apartment with noise and laughter. She maintained contact with Sarah, who'd become a friend beyond her professional role, and with Mrs. Chen, who occasionally stopped by to check on the family she'd helped create. The fourth year brought puberty and all its complicated hormones. The girls started developing at different rates, their identical appearances finally diverging in noticeable ways. Ava shot up 3 inches, suddenly the tallest. Nora remained petite, but developed curves early. June stayed somewhere in the middle, athletic and lean. They fought more, their formerly united front fracturing under the pressure of becoming teenagers. Arguments about bathroom time, clothing choices, friend groups, everything and nothing. Elena navigated it with the patience of someone who'd learned that conflict wasn't failure, it was just growth in disguise. They're becoming individuals, Sarah observed during one of their monthly coffee dates. That's healthy, even when it's hard to watch. I know, Elena said, but sometimes I miss when they moved as one unit, when their bond was their survival mechanism. Now they're secure enough to fight, to disagree, to be separate people. It's what we wanted for them. It just feels bittersweet. Because it means you did your job right, Sarah said gently. Secure children feel safe enough to differentiate. Traumatized children stay merged for protection. The fact that they're fighting about normal teenage things means the trauma is healing. The reassurance helped, but Elena still found herself missing the easier years, when love and stability had seemed like enough, before hormones and social dynamics and the complicated business of adolescence entered the equation. The 5th year brought Christina back permanently. She'd accepted a position with a firm in the city, bought a condo 20 minutes away, and became a regular presence in their lives. She attended family dinners, helped with homework, provided a different perspective that complemented Elena's. The girls called her Chris, a casual nickname that suggested comfort rather than formality. And slowly, miraculously, Christina and Elena rebuilt their relationship. Not erasing the past, but creating a new present where honest conversations replace polite distance, where they could acknowledge old hurts while choosing to move forward. You know what's strange? Christina said one evening while helping Elena prepare dinner. The girls were at various activities, the house briefly quiet. I spent so many years angry that you weren't there for me, and now I'm here, watching you be exactly the mother I needed, just for different children. And instead of being bitter, I'm just grateful that you figured it out, that these girls got what I didn't, that maybe I can be part of giving them what I missed. You're a better person than I am, Elena said. I don't know if I could be so generous about my own pain. You're doing it every day, Christina pointed out. You could have said no when Ethan asked for help. You could have maintained your retirement, your quiet life. But you chose the hard thing instead. That's generosity, Mom. That's what these girls needed, and what you gave them. The years accumulated. 5 became 6, then 7. The girls entered high school, each taking different paths that reflected who they were becoming. Ava enrolled in advanced placement science courses, her sights set on pre-med programs. Nora attended a specialized arts academy 2 afternoons a week, her portfolio growing in sophistication and emotional depth. June joined the mock trial team, her gift for argument finding perfect expression in legal frameworks. They were 15 when Ava found Ethan's letters again, tucked in the back of her desk drawer where she'd kept them safe for years. The 3 sisters sat together in their room, still shared despite Elena's offer to convert other spaces, because some bonds ran too deep to separate with walls, and read them aloud to each other. The words hit differently now, filtered through years of growth and healing. The girls they'd been when Ethan wrote these letters were different from the young women they'd become. But the core truths remained unchanged. They were brave, they were worthy, they were loved. Do you think we turned out the way he hoped? Nora asked, her voice quiet. Better, June said with certainty. We're better than hope. We're proof. Proof of what? Ava asked. That the impossible is possible, June said. That families can be built from broken pieces. That love matters more than time. That choosing people is just as valid as being born to them. We're living proof of everything Ethan believed in, everything he and Elena built together. They sat in silence, processing this. Then Ava stood, pulled out her phone, and started typing. I'm writing to the hospital, she announced. The one where we met Ethan. I want to set up a scholarship fund in his name for medical students who want to specialize in oncology. So maybe someone else can be saved the way Ethan couldn't be. Nora immediately opened her laptop. I'll donate a piece to auction for it. Something meaningful. Something that tells the story without words. June grabbed her debate notebook. And I'll write the proposal. Make the case for why this matters. Why hospitals should support programs like this. We'll make this happen. Elena found them an hour later, clustered around computers and notebooks, planning and dreaming and building something meaningful from their grief. She stood in the doorway watching, her heart so full it ached. This was what Ethan had died for. Not the scholarship specifically, but this. 3 sisters working together, channeling pain into purpose, choosing to create rather than destroy. This was the future he'd fought to give them, the proof that his final months had mattered. The scholarship fund became reality within a year, funded by Nora's art sales, community donations, and a surprisingly generous contribution from Christina's law firm. The first award went to a student whose mother had died of cancer, who understood personally why finding cures mattered. Ethan's name lived on, not in grief, but in hope, not in memory, but in action. The girls were 17 when they asked Elena if they could visit Ethan's grave on the anniversary of the day they'd met him, rather than the anniversary of his death. We've been focusing on losing him, Ava explained. But maybe we should celebrate finding him instead. Finding each other, finding you. So they went to the cemetery on a spring morning 8 years after that fateful hospital hallway encounter, carrying flowers and stories and gratitude. They told Ethan about their lives, their accomplishments, their plans. They told him about the scholarship, about Christina's return, about how Elena was doing. They told him everything, the way families do, maintaining connection across the barrier of death through the simple act of continuing to care. We're okay, June said, speaking for all of them. We're more than okay. We're exactly what you hoped we'd be, and we wanted you to know that your choice mattered, that those 4 months changed everything, that we're living the life you fought to give us. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of growing things, of renewal, of spring's eternal promise that endings are also beginnings. They graduated high school together, three identical young women in caps and gowns standing on a stage while Elena and Christina cheered from the audience. Ava was valedictorian, her speech about resilience and chosen family moving several people to tears. Nora's artwork decorated the ceremony program. June received a special recognition for her advocacy work in reforming local foster care policies. But the most meaningful moment came after the official ceremony, when they removed their caps and gowns and drove straight to the cemetery, still in their graduation dresses, to share the achievement with Ethan. "We made it," Nora said, sitting on the grass beside his headstone like she'd done countless times over the years. "All three of us, together, just like you promised. We're going to college. Ava's doing pre-med at Cornell. I'm going to art school in Rhode Island. June's doing political science at Georgetown. We're all on different paths, but we're still us. Still sisters. Still family," Ava added, "and Elena's coming with me. Well, not to college, obviously, but she's moving to an apartment near campus so I can visit on weekends. Christina's helping her find a place, because that's what family does. We adapt, we adjust, we stay together, even when geography tries to separate us." June's voice was steady but emotional. "You gave us 8 years, Ethan. 8 years we wouldn't have had if you'd walked past us in that hallway. 8 years of stability and love and proof that we mattered. Some people get 70 or 80 years with their parents. We got 4 months with you. But those 4 months were enough to change everything, to save us, to show us what family could be." Elena stood back, giving them privacy for this goodbye, this transition. Because that's what this was. The girls moving into adulthood, carrying forward the lessons they'd learned, the love they'd been given, the foundation that Ethan and Elena had built through impossible circumstances. Christina joined Elena, slipping an arm around her mother's shoulders. "You did it, Mom. You raised them, all the way through. They're remarkable." "They raised themselves," Elena said, her voice thick with pride and grief and joy all tangled together. "I just provided the stability for them to do it. They did the hard work." "That's what good parents do," Christina said. "Provide the stability. Give them space to become who they're meant to be. You did that, Mom, for them. And in a different way, you're doing it for me too now. Better late than never, right?" They stood together, mother and daughter, watching 3 young women say goodbye to the father who'd given them everything in 4 impossible months. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Elena of Nora's paintings, of beauty emerging from darkness. College brought new challenges and new growth. The physical distance was hard. The girls who'd spent their entire conscious lives together, now scattered across 3 states. But they video called daily, visited monthly, and maintained the bond that had saved them. They brought roommates home for holidays, introduced significant others to the family, built lives that honored where they'd come from while embracing where they were going. Ava excelled in her pre-med program, her personal motivation driving her to the top of her class. She volunteered at children's hospitals, working with oncology patients, offering the kind of presence and hope that she'd needed during Ethan's illness. She was gentle with dying patients in ways that suggested she understood death intimately, had made peace with it even as she fought to delay it. Nora's artwork evolved into installations that explored themes of family, loss, and resilience. Her senior exhibition, titled 4 Months Forever, used mixed media to tell the story of how temporary connections could have permanent impact. Critics called it profound. Nora called it true. June threw herself into policy work, interning with organizations that advocated for foster care reform. She testified before committees, wrote policy proposals, used her story to humanize statistics. She was fierce and uncompromising in her belief that the system could be better, should be better, must be better for the children still trapped in it. And Elena, now approaching 80, found herself in the strange position of watching her daughters build lives while maintaining her own. She moved near Ava's campus as promised, then back to the city when Ava's medical school plan solidified. Christina visited regularly. Their relationship transformed from obligation to genuine friendship. They went to museums together, discussed books, supported each other through life's smaller challenges. The years continued their relentless forward march. 21, 22, 23. The girls graduated college, began careers, started building the lives Ethan had fought to make possible. They returned for holidays, filling Elena's apartment with noise and laughter and the chaos of adult children who still needed home base, still needed mom, because that's what Elena had become, mom. Not mother, with its biological implications, but mom in every way that mattered. The person they called with good news and bad. The one whose opinion they valued, whose approval they sought, whose love they trusted absolutely. At 25, Ava was accepted into Johns Hopkins Medical School. Nora sold her first major installation to a museum. June won a position with a prestigious advocacy organization. They celebrated together, all of them. Elena, Christina, Sarah, who'd stayed part of their lives, even Mrs. Chen, who'd retired but maintained contact with the family she'd helped create. It was at that celebration in Elena's apartment that had witnessed so much growth and healing that Ava made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I'm getting married," she said, and her sisters shrieked with excitement while Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "His name is David. He's a researcher in the oncology department. We met during a clinical trial, and he knows everything about Ethan, about how we became a family, about all of it, and he loves us anyway, all of us." The wedding was small, intimate, held in the same chapel where they'd said goodbye to Ethan 11 years earlier. But this time, instead of mourning an ending, they were celebrating a beginning. David was kind and patient and clearly smitten with Ava. He'd asked Elena's permission before proposing, a gesture that had made her cry. He treated Nora and June like the sisters they were, understanding that marrying Ava meant joining a unit, not separating her from it. During the reception, the three sisters stood together as they'd done so many times before, watching couples dance and feeling the weight of how far they'd come. "Ethan should be here," Nora said quietly, walking you down the aisle, giving his blessing, seeing how everything turned out. "He is here," Ava said, touching her hand to her heart. "Every lesson he taught us, every sacrifice he made, every choice that led us to this moment. He's in all of it. We carry him with us. Always." June raised her champagne glass. "To Ethan, who said yes when he could have walked away, who chose us when choosing was hard, who gave us 4 months that became forever." They clinked glasses. Three women who'd been terrified children once, who'd begged a stranger for help and received not just help but love, not just rescue but family. Elena watched from across the room, Christina beside her, both of them crying happy tears. "We did it," Elena whispered. "We actually did it. We kept them together. We raised them. We gave them the future Ethan wanted." "No," Christina corrected gently. "You did it, Mom. You and Ethan together, across time and despite death. You built something impossible. You made it real." The years that followed brought more milestones. Nora married a fellow artist in a ceremony that was more performance art than traditional wedding, beautiful and unconventional and perfectly her. June found love with a fellow advocate, someone who matched her passion and fire. They had a courthouse wedding, practical and efficient, followed by a party that turned into an impromptu fundraiser for foster care reform. Grandchildren came. Ava's twins first, a boy and a girl, who Elena held with shaking hands and overwhelming gratitude. Then Nora's son, named Ethan, without hesitation, with middle names honoring their biological parents. June adopted siblings from the foster system, 2 boys who needed exactly what the Miller-Kowalski family had learned to provide. Unconditional love, unwavering stability, proof that families could be chosen. And through it all, through marriages and births and careers and life's beautiful chaos, the 3 sisters maintained their bond. They video called weekly, visited monthly, showed up for each other the way Elena had shown up for them, the way Ethan had shown up for all of them in a hospital hallway on the worst and best day of their lives. Elena was 87 when her health began to fail. Not dramatically, just the gradual slowing that came with age. The girls noticed first, saw the fatigue, the occasional confusion, the way simple tasks had become difficult. They convened an emergency meeting, appearing at Elena's door like they'd done as children, united in purpose. "You're moving in with me," Ava announced. She'd purchased a house large enough for her growing family and then some. No arguments. You gave us 10 years of your retirement. Let us give you care in return. Elena wanted to protest, wanted to maintain her independence. But looking at three faces that wore expressions of determination and love, she realized this was what Ethan had built. A family that showed up, that stayed, that cared for each other across generations. Okay, she said simply. Okay. The transition was smoother than expected. Elena's apartment became a guest space for when Nora and June visited. Her furniture integrated into Ava's home. Her routines adapted to include grandchildren's schedules and family dinners, and the beautiful chaos of a house full of life. Christina visited weekly, her relationship with her mother now defined by genuine affection rather than obligation. They sat together watching Ava's twins play, discussing books and memories and the strange paths life took. I used to resent them, Christina admitted one afternoon. Your foster daughters. I thought they'd stolen the mother I'd needed. But they didn't steal you. They saved you, gave you purpose when grief might have destroyed you. And in saving you, they somehow healed something between us too. Strange how that works. Not strange, Elena said. Just family, real family, the kind built on choice and effort rather than accident of birth. On Elena's 90th birthday, the girls, now women in their 30s, threw a celebration that filled Ava's backyard with 3 generations of chosen family. Grandchildren ran through sprinklers, adults clustered in conversation groups. Sarah was there. Mrs. Chen too, witnesses to the family they'd helped create decades earlier. Ava stood to make a toast, her twins sitting on either side of her, David's arm around her shoulders. 30 years ago, 3 terrified children approached a stranger in a hospital and begged for help. That stranger said yes, and his yes changed everything. It brought us Elena, who said yes too. It brought us Christina, who learned to say yes. It built this. She gestured around the yard, at the people gathered, at the family assembled. All of this, a family that started with a lie and became the truest thing in our lives. Nora added her voice to the toast. We've had 30 years together, 30 years we weren't supposed to have. The system wanted to split us apart. Statistics said families like ours didn't work, but we made it work. Through grief and growth and every challenge life threw at us, we stayed together. Because that's what Ethan and Elena taught us. Staying matters. Choosing each other matters. Love matters more than anything. June finished the thought, her voice steady and strong. So here's to Elena, who gave us a home when we needed it most. To Christina, who came back when coming back was hard. To Sarah and Mrs. Chen, who bent rules to keep us together. To Ethan, who we carry with us always. And to us, 3 sisters who refused to be separated, who built lives worth living, who proved that family isn't about blood or biology, but about showing up every single day and choosing each other, forever. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Elena wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the love surrounding her, by the impossibility made real, by 3 children who'd become her daughters, who'd given her life meaning when meaning had felt lost. That night, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, Elena sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Ava found her there, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, sat beside her in comfortable silence. Thank you, Elena said eventually, for all of this, for letting an old woman crash your lives. You didn't crash anything, Ava said. You saved everything. You and Ethan together. You gave us the future we're living. Every good thing in my life traces back to that hospital hallway, to your willingness to say yes when you could have said no. Do you ever wonder what would have happened? Elena asked. If Ethan had walked past you? If I'd declined to help? If any of the 1,000 things that had to go right had gone wrong instead? Sometimes, Ava admitted. But then I look around at this life, at my sisters, at my children, at you. And I realize that wondering about other possibilities is pointless. This is what happened. This is what we built. And it's beautiful. Elena was 93 when she died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family, her last conscious moments filled with love and gratitude and the certainty that her life had mattered. The funeral was enormous. 3 daughters and their families, grandchildren who'd known her as simply Grandma Elena, friends and colleagues, and people whose lives she'd touched across 9 decades. The girls spoke at the service, their eulogy a joint effort that celebrated a woman who'd chosen to be extraordinary in ordinary ways, who'd said yes to 3 strangers and built a family from that single decision. They buried her next to Ethan, the 2 people who'd saved 3 children, whose combined efforts had created something that lasted far beyond their individual lives. The headstones sat side by side, markers of people who'd mattered, who'd chosen love, who'd proved that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. And life continued, as it always does. Ava raised her children with the same fierce protectiveness she'd received, teaching them about a great-uncle named Ethan, who they'd never meet but should always remember. Nora's art continued exploring themes of family and resilience, her most celebrated piece, a memorial installation honoring Elena and Ethan titled "They Said Yes." June's advocacy work led to actual policy changes, laws reformed, systems improved, children protected in ways she and her sisters hadn't been. The grandchildren grew, learning their family history not as tragedy, but as triumph. They visited the cemetery to leave flowers on the graves of the great-uncle and great-grandmother who'd started it all. They heard stories about the hospital hallway, the lie that became truth, the 4 months that became forever. And when those grandchildren had children of their own, the story continued passing down. An inheritance not of wealth or property, but of values, of proof that love could be chosen, that family could be built, that saying yes to someone in need could change the world. 35 years after 3 terrified girls approached a dying man in a hospital, Ava stood in front of a lecture hall full of medical students, sharing her story as she did every year. Family isn't about perfection, she told them. It's not about having all the answers or getting everything right. It's about showing up. It's about saying yes when you could say no. It's about staying when leaving would be easier. My uncle Ethan had 6 months to live. He spent 4 of them fighting for me and my sisters. He could have used that time for himself, could have focused on his own comfort, his own peace. But he chose differently. He chose us. And that choice rippled forward through decades, created this life I'm living, saved children who desperately needed saving. So when you're working with terminal patients, remember, the length of their remaining life doesn't determine its value. 4 months can contain more meaning than 40 years. 4 months can change everything. 4 months can become forever. The students listened, rapt. Many were crying, because the story wasn't just about Ethan and Elena and 3 foster children. It was about the fundamental truth that every human life mattered, that every connection had potential, that choosing love over fear could transform impossible situations into beautiful realities. After the lecture, a young student approached Ava hesitantly. "Dr. Miller, I'm in foster care. I have 2 younger siblings. The system wants to split us up, says keeping us together isn't practical. But your story, it gives me hope that maybe there's another way, that maybe someone will say yes for us too." Ava took the student's hands in hers, looked into eyes that reminded her of her own at 7 years old, terrified, desperate, hoping against hope for rescue. "There is another way," she said firmly, "and if the system won't provide it, we'll build it ourselves. Give me your caseworker's number. Let me make some calls. Because 35 years ago, people said yes for me when they didn't have to. Now it's my turn to say yes for someone else. That's how this works. That's how we keep the promise alive." The student's eyes filled with tears of relief and hope. Ava pulled out her phone, already dialing, already fighting, already proving that the lessons Ethan and Elena had taught weren't just history. They were living principles, active commitments, promises that each generation kept for the next. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Ethan knew. He saw what his choice had created, saw the ripples extending forward through time, saw 3 children become women, become mothers, become fighters for other children who needed exactly what they'd received. Someone to say yes, someone to stay, someone to prove that family was something you built rather than something you inherited. His 4 months had become forever. Not in his own life, but in theirs. Not in his own body, but in the values they carried forward. Not in his presence, but in his legacy. And that legacy whispered the truth he'd discovered in a hospital hallway 35 years ago. That love didn't require longevity to matter. That impact wasn't measured in years, but in depth. That saying yes to strangers could become the most important decision you ever made. The story that began with a lie, with 3 children pretending a stranger was their father, had become the truest thing in their lives. Not because biology made it so, but because choice did. Because Ethan chose them. Because Elena chose them. Because they chose each other every single day through grief and growth and every challenge life presented. They were family, not by blood, not by law originally, but by the most powerful force of all, by deliberate, conscious, unwavering choice. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.